Sergeant Dale Morrow grabbed her arm without asking and yanked the sleeve up in front of everyone. "Look at this!" he shouted, holding her wrist in the air like a trophy. "Headquarters sent us a woman with a cat tattoo." He laughed into her face. Hard. Close. Then he grabbed the rifle case out of her other hand, popped the latches, pulled the old bolt action out, and dropped it in the dirt. Actually dropped it in the dirt in front of her. "Take that back to the museum, sweetheart. Men are dying out here." She picked it up, slowly, said nothing, and walked past every single one of them. If that moment made your blood boil, stay with this story to the very end and drop your city in the comments right now. I want to see exactly how far this story reaches. If you love stories about people who were counted out and came back to prove everyone wrong, subscribe to this channel right now and drop your city in the comments below. I want to see how far this story travels. Now let's get into part 1. The forward operating base had no real name anymore. Everyone just called it Dust Bowl because that was honest. 3 months of enemy pressure had reduced it to a collection of sandbag walls, broken equipment, and men who slept with one eye open and one hand on a trigger. The radio tower had been hit twice. The water filtration unit was running at 40% capacity. The perimeter sensors kept throwing false positives at 3 in the morning, which meant nobody was getting a full night of sleep, and sleep-deprived men made mistakes. Commander Ethan Brooks had filed 17 supply requests in the last 6 weeks. He had received responses to 4 of them. Of those 4, 2 were denials, 1 was a delay notice, and 1 was a form letter that didn't even reference anything he had asked for. He was standing outside his command tent at 06:15, drinking the worst coffee he had ever tasted in 22 years of military service, watching the sun come up over the ridgeline, and trying to calculate how many more days they could hold this position before the math stopped working in their favor. That was when Sergeant Dale Morrow came around the corner of the communications shack, moving at a speed that meant either something had gone wrong or something had arrived, and at Dust Bowl, those 2 things were usually the same. Commander Morrow said, slightly out of breath, "We've got a visitor." Brooks didn't move. "Enemy contact." "No, sir, headquarters. They sent us sniper support." Brooks turned. He looked at Morrow's face. He looked for the part where Morrow would explain that this was good news. He didn't find it. "Why do you look like that?" Brooks asked. "You should probably just come see, sir." He followed Morrow around the communications shack past the motor pool, where 2 of his mechanics were already working on a vehicle that had given up the will to live sometime around Tuesday, and out toward the main gate where a small cluster of his men had gathered. They weren't clustered the way men cluster when something dangerous has happened. They were clustered the way men cluster when something has given them something to laugh about. And laughter at Dust Bowl had become so rare that it drew a crowd the same way water would. She was standing just inside the gate, hooded, still. One hand holding a rifle case that had seen decades of use, the latches worn down to bare metal, the corners scuffed in ways that suggested it had traveled places the men laughing at it could not imagine. She wasn't small, but she wasn't imposing in the way that made men stop automatically. She was the kind of person you might look past twice before you registered that something about her was completely different from everyone else in the vicinity. Sergeant Morrow had apparently already done his inspection. He turned to Brooks as they approached and said just loud enough for the surrounding men to hear, "She came in on the resupply run. No escort, no advance notice. Just showed up with that old rifle case and told the gate sergeant she was our sniper support." One of the younger Marines, Corporal Tate, called out from the crowd, "Commander, you should see what she's got on her wrist." Brooks stopped 3 feet in front of her. He looked at her face. She looked back at him from under the hood. Her eyes were the kind of gray that didn't shift under pressure. Nothing about her expression changed. "Name," Brooks said. "If a cross," she said. Her voice was flat, not quiet out of nervousness. Quiet the way very specific kinds of people are quiet, the way people get when they have spent so many years around loud violence that sound to them has become a tool to be used only when necessary. "Rank?" Brooks asked. "Civilian contractor," she said. "Attached to NATO advisory unit." Brooks waited for more. More didn't come. "Where are your transfer papers?" he asked. She reached into the inside pocket of her jacket and produced a single folded document. Brooks took it. He opened it. The letterhead was legitimate. The authorization codes were legitimate. The signature line had a name he didn't recognize and a classification designation that told him he wasn't going to get any background through normal channels. "Where'd you come from?" he asked. "Wherever the last assignment was," she said. Morrow leaned close to Brooks and said quietly, "Sir Tate tried to look her up in the base system while you were walking over. Nothing came back." Brooks kept his eyes on Ava Cross. "Database error." "Tate said the query went through fine," Morrow said. "Just nothing on the other end, like the profile doesn't exist." Corporal Tate, who apparently felt this was the moment to contribute, said, "And Commander, the tattoo. Show him the tattoo." Ava Cross didn't react to Tate. She didn't look at him. She didn't tense. She behaved exactly as if Tate had not spoken, which somehow made Tate less comfortable than if she had responded. Brooks said, "Let me see your wrist." For a long second, she looked at him. Then she pulled back her sleeve. On the inside of her right wrist, small and precise and done in black ink that had faded just slightly with years, was a cat. A lynx specifically if you looked at it carefully enough to see the tufted ears and the proportions. It was not decorative. It was not casual. It was the kind of tattoo that meant something very specific to whoever wore it and had been placed where it was intentionally. Sergeant Morrow, who had a gift for reading silence, put his hands in his pockets and looked away. Tate, who did not have that gift, said, "A kitty cat. That's what headquarters sent us." He looked around at the other men. "A kitty cat and a rifle older than my grandfather." There was laughter. Not all of the men laughed, but enough of them did to make the sound carry across the motor pool. Brooks watched Ava Cross while the laughter went on. She didn't respond. Her expression did not change. Her breathing did not change. It was as if the laughter was happening in a different room that she could hear faintly through a wall and had no particular interest in. That more than anything bothered Brooks. Not the rifle, not the missing records, not the single-page transfer document with the unfamiliar signature. What bothered him was that she was standing in front of a crowd of combat-hardened men who were openly laughing at her, and she was responding with the exact quality of stillness that very few human beings can sustain under that kind of social pressure. Most people react. They get angry, or they get small, or they perform not caring in ways that reveal that they do. She wasn't performing anything. She was simply there. "Morrow," Brooks said, "get her assigned to Iraq. Watchtower 3 has the best sight lines," she said. Brooks looked at her. "You've been here 30 seconds. "I studied the satellite imagery on the way in," she said. "Watchtower 3 has the longest clear engagement corridor on 3 sides. The 4th side has a blind spot that can be partially compensated for from the 2nd platform level if you angle the base mount. The tower structure looks compromised on the east support, but it'll hold weight if it's distributed correctly." Silence. Even Tate stopped laughing. Brooks stared at her for 3 full seconds. Then he said, "Morrow, show her to Watchtower 3. Watchtower 3 was not a tower anyone wanted. It had taken 2 direct hits from small arms fire 3 weeks back, and while it hadn't collapsed, it had developed a personality that made men nervous. The platform swayed in high wind. The eastern support made a sound when it bore weight that Sergeant Kowalski, who had done 3 construction projects before enlisting, described as concerning. The stairs had a section near the top where you needed to step carefully, or you were going to have a bad moment. Morrow brought her there and showed her the stairs without comment. She looked at the tower, then climbed it. She didn't test the stairs the way someone unfamiliar with risk tests things. She went up the way someone who has already calculated the acceptable variables goes up steadily, with her weight distributed without hesitation. Morrow stayed at the bottom. He wasn't sure why. He told himself it was to make sure she didn't fall. He knew that wasn't true. He heard her moving up on the platform. He heard the sound of the rifle case latches. Then silence. Then after several minutes, she came back down. "It'll work," she said. "You're sure?" Morrow said. "The sway is consistent," she said. "Consistent variables are manageable. It's the inconsistent ones that kill you." She walked back toward the base, and Morrow stood there for a moment wondering if she had just said something philosophical or something entirely operational, and whether there was a difference. Commander Brooks spent the next 3 hours trying to find something on Ava Cross through every channel available to him. He went through his direct liaison at Regional Command. He went through the intelligence officer, Lieutenant Carver, who had contacts that extended into NATO advisory networks. He filed an expedited background inquiry through the secure system and sent a personal message to a colonel he had served under, who now worked in a position that gave him access to records that didn't appear in standard databases. Every path came back empty or came back blocked. Not the kind of blocked where someone had made an error. The kind of blocked where someone had made a decision. There's a classification flag on anything connected to her name, Carver told him, sitting across the folding table in the command tent with a look on his face that he usually reserved for things that genuinely unsettled him. It's not a standard flag. The tag is from an oversight office that I don't have clearance to even query for explanation. Which office? Brooks asked. Carver looked at him steadily. The one that handles personnel who are officially listed as killed in action. Brooks set down his coffee cup. She's listed as KIO, he said. I don't know, Carver said. I can't get in far enough to see the full record. What I can tell you is that whatever file connects to her name or to the authentication codes on her transfer document, the access flag that comes back is the same category they use for posthumous files. Files for people who are officially deceased. That afternoon, the enemy made contact. It wasn't a coordinated assault. It was a scout patrol, 4 or 5 individuals moving at the edge of engagement range far enough out that they could survey the base with binoculars and confirm patrol patterns without committing to an engagement. It was the kind of probe that precedes something larger. Brooks had seen it before. They were mapping weaknesses. They were counting resources. They would report back, and the larger force would use what they learned. His standing order was to avoid engagement at extreme distance unless the tactical picture changed. There wasn't enough ammunition to expend on long-range suppression that had low probability of effect. He was standing at the radio when Corporal Tate's voice came in on the tactical channel. Commander, something's happening at Watchtower 3. Brooks crossed the base in under 2 minutes. He got to the base of the watchtower and looked up. She was in position on the platform, not standing, prone using a brace she had apparently constructed from materials she found in the tower. The rifle was extended in front of her. Her body was absolutely motionless. Morrow was already standing nearby watching through binoculars. He handed them to Brooks without speaking. Brooks looked through them toward the ridgeline. The scout patrol was there. He could see them. He estimated the distance at over 2,000 meters. At that range, without wind compensation data, without a spotting system, with an aged rifle of unknown current calibration engagement, was not a serious option. It was more than a mile. A mile of desert air with shifting thermal currents coming off the sand as the day heated with elevation differential and target movement factored in. He lowered the binoculars. He looked up at the tower. He started to open his mouth to tell Morrow to get her to stand down before she drew attention to the position. The rifle fired, one shot, a sound that was somehow both sharp and contained the kind of report that a bolt-action rifle of that caliber makes when it is firing a properly loaded cartridge through a properly maintained barrel at the precise moment the trigger is broken correctly. Through the binoculars, Morrow watched a figure at the ridgeline drop. Complete silence on the base. 8 seconds. The rifle fired again. A second figure dropped. 2 for 2, Morrow said quietly. His voice had changed. It was the voice of someone who has just witnessed something that has reorganized their frame of reference. Tate was standing 10 feet away with his mouth open. Brooks lifted the binoculars again. The remaining figures on the ridgeline had scattered. They were gone. No further targets. The entire engagement from first shot to final shot had taken less than 12 seconds. He climbed the tower. He was careful on the stairs. He came out onto the platform, and she was already sitting up, working the bolt of the rifle with the methodical focus of someone running a post-firing inspection. She did not look up immediately. 2 confirmed, he asked. 2 confirmed, she said. The third displaced before I had a second immuning solution. Wind shifted. That was over 2,000 meters, he said. 2,140, give or take 30, she said. The variable I was least certain about was the thermal layer at around the 1,200 meter mark. Sand heat at that elevation creates a refraction effect that's inconsistent. I accounted for it, but it's still a confidence limiter. He stared at her. You were calculating thermal refraction without instrumentation. Instrumentation helps, she said, but you can read thermals from the way heat shimmer behaves at distance if you've spent enough time doing it. It's a skill. It takes years. Where did you develop it? She looked at him then. For a long moment, she looked directly at him, and in that moment, Brooks felt with absolute certainty that this woman had spent more time in places like this, or worse than this, than most people accumulated in a lifetime of military service. Her eyes held a specific quality, not hardness. Hardness was about blocking things out. This was something else. This was a person who had let things in and had learned to carry them. That was harder. That took longer. Different places, she said. She went back to the rifle. He climbed down and did not push further. Not because he had decided to trust her, because he had decided to learn more before he decided anything. That night he found the file. He wasn't supposed to find it. He wasn't supposed to have the access pathway that led him to it, and the pathway itself existed only because a lieutenant colonel he had served with in Germany 4 years earlier had quietly added him to a shared access tier for a NATO intelligence resource exchange program that was technically current but practically never used. He had forgotten about the access completely. He had been looking through every channel he could think of systematic exhaustion if nothing else, when the NATO database query returned something. Not under Ava Cross, under an operational designation, Phantom Links. The file was partially redacted. Large sections were blacked out, not just obscured, but removed in ways that told him the original document had been reviewed by multiple classification authorities over time. But what remained was enough. A sniper operative origin classified who had operated in Eastern European theaters beginning approximately 9 years earlier. The file listed engagements across 4 countries, confirmed eliminations at ranges that Brooks, who knew snipers and their capabilities, read twice to make sure he wasn't misreading. One confirmed engagement listed at 2,340 meters, another at 2,180, a third at 2,290. She had done it before, many times. The 2 100-meter shot this afternoon was not exceptional for her. It was Tuesday. The file listed a counterintelligence citation for an operation in which Phantom Links had penetrated an enemy surveillance network and extracted intelligence that changed the operational picture for an entire Allied task force. It listed a commendation for an engagement in which she had held a 3-man observation post against an approaching enemy force of 30, while the rest of the unit extracted. It listed another commendation and another. And then at the bottom of the active service section, a single line. Operator declared killed in action, date redacted, location redacted. File status closed. Personnel category, posthumous records. Brooks sat back in his chair and looked at the ceiling of the command tent for a long time. "She's dead," he said to Carver the next morning. Carver looked at him. "Sir, according to the file, officially, she was declared killed in action. Her file is categorized as posthumous records." Brooks set the printout on the table between them. "And she is standing on our watchtower platform right now, running a post-dawn observation sweep." Carver looked at the printout. He looked up at Brooks. "What do you want to do?" "I don't know yet," Brooks said. "What I know is that she hits targets at over 2,000 meters with a rifle that none of our guys can even get consistent groups with at 300. She has more operational commendations in a partially redacted file than most operators accumulate in a full career. And someone at a level above both of us decided she needed to be here, and that we didn't need to know who she really was." "That could mean a lot of things," Carver said carefully. "It could," Brooks said. "Or it could mean that whatever she survived to get here, whatever happened to make her officially dead while she is actually standing on our watchtower, they needed her specifically. For this, for whatever is coming." He looked out through the tent opening at the tower in the distance. She was up there. He could see the dark shape of her at the rail glass to her eye scanning. "She's not a ghost story," Brooks said quietly. "She's a weapon somebody built over a very long time and then tried to put away." And something about the situation changed the calculation. The day passed without contact, which Brooks knew from experience was usually worse than a day with contact. No contact meant movement was happening somewhere you weren't watching, organization was underway somewhere you couldn't see, and the next thing you heard would be larger than the last thing you heard. He spent an hour at 1400 reviewing the week's perimeter data with Sergeant Kowalski, who ran their sensor array with the dedication of a man who understood that bad data was more dangerous than no data. The sensor logs from the previous 48 hours showed 3 separate anomalies in the northeast corridor that were outside the normal false positive pattern. Not dramatic, not conclusive, but persistent in a way that Kowalski found meaningful. They're probing, Kowalski said, not randomly, structured, same timing intervals. They're running a pattern to see where our response triggers, which means they already know where the response doesn't trigger, Brooks said. Possibly, Kowalski said, or they're building a map. Brooks brought this to Ava Cross that evening. He climbed the tower as the light was failing and found her seated on the platform with the rifle case open beside her, but the rifle already reassembled in her hands. She was not in a firing position. She was holding it the way some people hold a familiar object when they are thinking. He told her what Kowalski had said about the sensor anomalies. She listened without interrupting. When he finished, she was quiet for a moment. Northeast corridor, she said. What's the terrain like at around 800 to 1,200 meters? Broken rock, some old structure ruins, shallow wadi that cuts east to west at about 950. They're using the wadi for approach cover, she said immediately. The sensor anomalies are probably personnel, not vehicles. They're moving in small numbers, rotating through specifically to stay below the threshold that would trigger a response protocol. They're not probing randomly. They're inserting observation personnel to get eyes on your watchtower coverage gaps. Brooks looked at her. You got all that from what I just described. I got a probability from what you described, she said. It becomes a certainty if the anomalies maintain the same timing interval for another 12 hours. If the interval breaks or accelerates, the calculus changes. And if it's a certainty, he said, then something large is coming, she said, and it knows your base better than you'd like. She looked at him then directly, and there was something in her expression that was almost, not quite, but almost an opening, as if she was deciding whether to say something more than the operational analysis required. What are you not telling me? He said. She held his gaze for a long moment. Then she said, the convoy in the NATO advisory file that was flagged 3 days ago is moving into this operational sector. The one with the air defense capability that grounded your resupply run last week. Brooks went still. How do you know about the advisory flag that's above the clearance level on your transfer document? I know about it, she said, because I've seen convoys configured like that one before, in different theaters, different operators running them, but the same basic strategic logic. They don't send air defense capability into a theater unless they intend to create a closed air corridor. A closed air corridor means this base stops receiving resupply. A base that stops receiving resupply stops being defensible in about 10 days at current consumption rates. You've been analyzing our consumption rates, Brooks said. I've been on bases that ran out of options, she said. I pay attention to the variables. He sat down on the edge of the platform, not because he had decided to, but because the picture she was drawing had weight and he felt it. They're setting up a perimeter, he said. The convoy cuts off air. The scout probes map our watchtower gaps. And then whatever they're building in that northeast corridor comes through the wadi, she said. Not all at once. Pressure in stages, make you spend ammunition you can't replace, make you make decisions under resource constraint. It's a methodical approach. It takes time to set up, which means it's already been underway longer than your sensor data shows. Brooks looked at the desert in the direction of the northeast. The dark was full out now, stars coming through with the hard clarity that clear, dry air produces. You've fought this kind of engagement before, he said. Not a question. I've survived it, she said. He heard the distinction. Ava Cross, he said. He said it carefully, watching her face. Is that actually your name? She looked at him. That stillness again. That quality of absolute quiet that he had noticed at the gate that he had thought about repeatedly since. It's the name on the transfer document, she said. That's not what I asked, he said. She looked out at the desert, not avoiding the question, considering it, as if the answer required care in the construction. Names are functional, she said finally. They're tools for identity in a given context. In this context for this mission, I am Ava Cross. She paused. There are other contexts where I was other things. Where he said, where she confirmed quietly. The NATO file, he said. He said it and watched her. He saw something move through her expression so briefly that if he hadn't been looking directly at her, he would have missed it. You found something, she said. It was not a question. Partial records, he said, heavily redacted, but enough. Enough to what, she said. Enough to tell me that whoever built the operator in those records, he said slowly, spent approximately 9 years doing it. And enough to tell me that approximately 2 years ago, whoever that operator was got declared killed in action. Silence on the tower platform. Somewhere out in the dark, an animal or the wind moved through something loose. She's not dead, he said. Ava Cross looked at him for a long time. Her expression was something he couldn't fully name. Not grief, not relief. Something in the territory between them, something that belonged to a person carrying a story that was too complicated for either of those simple labels. She was for a while, she said quietly, the version of her that existed before, yes. That one died. She looked back at the desert. What came back was different. Different how, he said. Better at surviving, she said. Worse at everything else. Brooks looked at her profile against the night sky. He thought about the file. He thought about the list of engagements, the confirmed ranges, the commendations, and the redactions, and the final line. He thought about a woman who had been officially erased and had come back anyway carrying an old rifle case with worn-down latches onto a base full of men who laughed at her on arrival and fell silent 40 seconds into her first engagement. What name was in that file, he asked. She was quiet for a long moment. One you wouldn't recognize, she said, but the designation at the top of it. The operational designation. She paused. You saw it. He had phantom links. He didn't say it. He didn't need to. He watched her face and she watched the desert and the name sat between them with the weight of something that had traveled a very long distance to arrive at this tower on this night. Whoever that was, he said carefully, whoever built those records and then got officially erased, she came here. Something needed doing, she said simply. This base, these men, the convoy. She looked at him then, and her eyes were direct and clear, and carried the specific gravity of someone who has made a fundamental decision and is no longer subject to the weight of indecision. Someone needed to hold this position long enough for your command to understand what is coming, long enough to give you a chance. And you think you can do that alone, he said. She looked at him with something that might in a different context have been the beginning of something like a smile. I've been doing it alone for a long time, she said. But I didn't come here to be alone. I came here because this base, these men, deserve someone who understands what's actually approaching. And I understand it better than anyone you have access to. Brooks stood up. He looked out at the same desert she had been watching. Get some sleep, he said. Tomorrow morning, I want you to walk me through the full threat assessment. Everything you know about that convoy, everything. Agreed, she said. He started for the stairs. He was 3 steps down when her voice came from above him, quiet and precise. Commander? He looked up. The Phantom Links file, she said. However much of it you were able to access. What was the last confirmed engagement range listed? He thought about it. 2,340 meters, he said. She looked at him steadily. The shot today was closer than that, she said. Not my longest. He climbed down the tower stairs in the dark, moving carefully over the compromised section near the top. And when he reached the bottom, he stood for a moment and looked up at the platform where her silhouette was still visible against the stars. And he understood with the particular clarity that only comes from encountering something genuinely extraordinary that the men who had laughed this morning had no idea, absolutely no idea what had walked through their gate. The morning after the tower conversation, Brooks was already standing outside the command tent before dawn finished breaking. He hadn't slept more than 2 hours. Not because the base was under pressure, though it was. Not because the sensor anomalies had continued through the night, though they had. He hadn't slept because he kept returning to the same moment. A woman picking a rifle out of the dirt with the specific calm of someone who had already decided that other people's opinions of her were not data she needed to process. He had her threat assessment in his hand. She had written it out by hand on 3 pages of standard issue paper and left it under the door of the command tent sometime in the night. No header. No name. Just the assessment, dense and precise, structured in a way that reflected a mind that had spent years thinking about how violence organizes itself at scale. The convoy was real. The approach corridor through the Northeast Wadi was confirmed as her primary threat hypothesis. She had cross-referenced the sensor anomaly timing with documented movement patterns from 2 previous engagements in similar terrain engagements. She referenced without elaboration, as if she expected whoever was reading to either already know or not need to know. The conclusion at the bottom of the third page was written in the same flat, careful hand as the rest of it. Estimated time to full assault readiness 72 hours, possibly less. Brooks folded the paper and put it in his jacket. Then he went to find Carver. Carver was in the intelligence shack running a signals check headphones around his neck, looking like a man who had also not slept. He took the assessment pages when Brooks handed them to him, read them, read the first page again, then set them down. "Who wrote this?" he said. "Our sniper support," Brooks said. Carver looked at him. "Cross wrote this." "Whatever her name actually is," Brooks said. "Yes." "This analysis," Carver said, tapping the pages, "this is not contractor-level work. This is theater-level intelligence analysis. The signals correlation on page 2 alone, that's not something you develop in a normal operational role. She's cross-referencing acoustic sensor variants with known infantry movement cadences and deriving unit size estimates. That's a very specific skill." "I know," Brooks said. "Where does someone develop that?" Carver said. "From experience," Brooks said. "A great deal of it. In places they apparently don't put in the normal file." Carver picked up the pages again and looked at the final conclusion. 72 hours, he said quietly. "Or less," Brooks said. "We need to verify the corridor. I need eyes in the northeast sector. Real eyes, not sensor data." Carver looked up. "You're going to ask her." "She already knows the terrain better than anyone on this base," Brooks said. "She mapped the satellite imagery on the drive-in. She's been running observation from the tower since she arrived. If anyone can verify what's moving in that wadi without compromising our position, it's her." "And if she's wrong," Carver said, "then we've lost a reconnaissance asset, and we're not significantly worse off than we are now," Brooks said. "But she's not wrong. You read the same page as I did." Carver didn't argue. He just looked at the assessment one more time and said quietly, "Be careful with this one, Commander. I don't mean tactically. I mean generally. Someone went to a great deal of trouble to make her officially not exist. People don't do that for ordinary reasons." "No," Brooks said, "they don't." He climbed the watchtower at 0730 and found her already in position, prone, running a slow sweep of the northeast corridor with a spotting scope she had apparently sourced from somewhere on the base. It was not a piece of equipment she had arrived with. He made a mental note to find out who had given it to her, then decided it didn't matter. "I read the assessment," he said. "Good," she said without moving. "I need verification on the Wadi corridor," he said. "I need to know what's actually in there, not a hypothesis. Confirmation." She was quiet for a moment, still working the scope in its slow, methodical arc. Then she said, "There are 3 positions along the Wadi's north bank that would give observation coverage of the primary approach channel without exposing a profile from the base side. 2 of them are accessible from a route that stays below the thermal detection threshold of the sensor array they've been running on the ridge." He stopped. "You know about their sensor array?" "I identified it yesterday afternoon," she said. "Thermal passive positioned at approximately 1,400 meters on the northeastern ridgeline. It's military grade, but not current generation. There's a detection floor at roughly human height profile if the thermal differential is below 15 degrees Celsius above ambient in. Before dawn, skin temperature variance is too low to trigger reliably." "You want to go before dawn," he said. "I want to go tonight," she said. 2 hours before first light. Solo approach, no support element, no radio traffic while I'm in position. I'll be back before the base goes to full morning stand to." "Solo," he said. "A 2-man element doubles the acoustic signature and halves the approach speed," she said. "Solo is faster and quieter. I've done longer approaches in worse conditions." He sat down on the platform edge and looked at the ridge line she was scanning. "What do you need from me?" he said. "Make sure Sergeant Morrow doesn't run a perimeter check on the south gate between 0200 and 0230, she said. "That's my preferred exit point. And make sure no one fires at movement in the northeast corridor until I'm back inside the wire." "That last one might be a challenge," Brooks said. My men are on a hair trigger." "Brief Morrow," she said. "He's steadier than the others." Brooks looked at her. "You've been watching my men." "I've been assessing everyone on this base since I arrived," and she said. "It's a habit. Morrow is solid. He controls his reactions. Tate is brave but impulsive. Kowalski is the most technically competent person you have and the most underutilized. Your medic, Sergeant Reyes, has a command quality that he doesn't know he has yet." She paused. You have a good unit, Commander. Better than the conditions they're operating under. He looked at her for a long moment. You assessed all of that in less than 48 hours, he said. I've been in a lot of bases, she said. You learn to read them quickly. You have to. Where, he said. Where have you been that taught you to read a base in 48 hours? She lowered the scope slightly, her jaw set in a way that was not refusal exactly. More like someone choosing the most honest available answer. Places that didn't go well, she said, and a few that did. The ones that didn't go well teach you faster. The assessment was right. Brooks confirmed it through Carver's signals intelligence before midday. The sensor anomalies in the northeast quarter had maintained their interval through the morning. With one significant change, the interval had shortened by 4 minutes. Whatever was moving in the wadi was accelerating its schedule. He briefed Morrow at 1400. He gave Morrow only what Morrow needed. Cross was running a solo reconnaissance of the northeast quarter tonight exit through Southgate at 0200. Nobody fires at northeast movement until she's back in the wire. Nobody questions why. Morrow listened to all of this with his hands on the table and his eyes on Brooks. Solo, Morrow said. Solo, Brooks confirmed. Into the northeast corridor, Morrow said, where whatever is setting up an assault on this base is currently staging. Yes, Brooks said. Morrow was quiet for a moment. Then he said, You trust her. It was not quite a question. I trust what I've seen, Brooks said, and I trust the math. She's the best asset we have for this specific problem. That's not a preference, that's a fact. Morrow nodded slowly. He didn't argue, but before he stood up, he said, Commander, the men are watching. They saw what she did at 100 meters. Nobody's laughing anymore. But there's something else happening now, something I don't have a word for yet. What kind of something? Brooks said. The kind that happens when men who thought they knew what capability looked like realize they were wrong, Morrow said. They're not sure how to handle it. Tate especially. Tate doesn't need to handle it, Brooks said. He needs to keep his sector clean and his mouth shut. Yes, sir, Morrow said. But men like Tate don't always do what they need to do when they're feeling a certain way. Brooks filed that. He didn't have a solution for it yet. He put it in the category of problems that required patience and moved on. At 1600, Corporal Tate came to the command tent. Brooks saw him standing at the entrance and almost told him to come back later. But something in Tate's posture, less swagger than usual, more something he couldn't name, made him wave him in. Sir, Tate said. He stood straight, but his hands weren't quite right, fingers opening and closing slightly at his sides. I want to say something about yesterday. About the gate, Brooks said. Yes, sir, Tate said. About what I said, and what Morrow did with the case. He stopped. His jaw moved. I've been in this unit for 14 months. I've seen men who talked a good game and couldn't deliver it when it mattered. I thought she was one of those. She's not, Brooks said. No, sir, Tate said. She is not. He met Brooks's eyes briefly, then looked somewhere to the left of him. I've been running numbers in my head since yesterday. The distance, the wind, the thermal thing she mentioned about the refraction layer. I looked that up last night. That's a real phenomenon, documented in advanced sniper doctrine. Takes years to read it by eye. He paused. I've been shooting since I was 8 years old. I can't do what she did yesterday. I'm not sure I know anyone who can. Brooks watched him. Why are you telling me this? Brooks said. Because I want to apologize to her, Tate said. Directly. And I wanted you to know that I was going to, so it didn't look like I was doing something without authorization. Brooks looked at him for a long moment. Then he said, You don't need my authorization to apologize to someone you were wrong about, Corporal. Tate nodded. He started to leave. Then he turned back. Sir, he said, who is she actually? Someone who's very good at what she does, Brooks said. That's enough for now. Tate left. Brooks sat with the question that remained in the air after him. The question he himself had been carrying for 2 days now. The question that had no clean answer because the file was redacted and the name she'd given him wasn't real. And the only thing he knew with certainty was that she was here. She was extraordinarily capable, and something had happened to her before she arrived that had changed the category of person she was. He thought about what she had said on the tower the night before. The version of her that existed before died. What came back was different. Better at surviving, worse at everything else. He had heard a language like that before. Not often. from very specific kinds of people who had gone through the specific kind of experience that reorganizes what a person is made of. It wasn't trauma in the ordinary sense, though trauma was part of it. It was more like a certain kind of death, not physical, but structural. The person they had been stops being able to exist in the conditions they're placed in. And what comes back from that is something the original person would not have recognized. Harder in some places, raw in others, capable of things the original person couldn't have done and lacking things the original person would have taken for granted. He had met 2 or 3 people in his career who spoke from inside that experience. He had never met one who carried it the way she did, which was to say, functionally, without drama, without making it visible unless someone looked very carefully. She was operational, that was the word. Whatever had happened to her, she had metabolized it into function, which was either the most impressive thing he had ever seen in a human being or the most alarming, and he was not yet sure which. She left at 0200 exactly. Morrow confirmed it by radio at 0202 with a 2-word message south clear, which was the signal they had arranged. Brooks was in the command tent. He did not sleep. He ran the threat assessment numbers again and looked at the communications traffic that Carver was monitoring and waited. At 0347, Morrow's voice came back on the radio. 1 word this time, wire. She was back inside. He found her in the motor pool of all places, sitting on the front bumper of the disabled vehicle that the mechanics had given up on drinking water from a canteen and running a systematic inspection of the rifle with a small flashlight. She was dirty. Not the kind of dirty you get from ordinary field work. The kind that comes from deliberate, precise movement through terrain at close quarters in the dark. She had been on the ground, moving slowly, for a long time. Well, he said. She looked up. Her eyes were very focused in the way that happens when a person has been running a high alertness state for several hours and is still coming down from it. The convoy is staging at a dry riverbed approximately 2.8 kilometers northeast, she said. Vehicle count is 11. Mix of technical vehicles and 2 heavier platforms that carry the anti-aircraft hardware your command flagged. There are dismounted personnel in the wadi itself. I counted 37, but there were sectors I couldn't observe without compromising my position. So the actual number is higher. How much higher, he said. Based on the vehicle count and standard force ratios for this type of operation, probably 70 to 90 total personnel, she said. The vehicles and the dismounted element are operating on separate communications, which is disciplined. Someone is running this well. Timeline, Brooks said. She looked at him steadily. They were conducting final coordination when I was in position, she said. Vehicle engines were cold and covered. Dismounts were in rest positions, which means they're preserving energy for an action phase. She paused. Not 72 hours, Commander. I was wrong about that. He felt it in his chest. How long, he said. 36 hours, she said. Possibly less if their coordination phase is already complete. Brooks stood in the dark of the motor pool with that number settling through him. 36 hours to prepare a defense against 90 personnel with air denial capability, with a base that was already running on degraded supply levels, with air support that was already grounded by the threat she had just confirmed was real. What do we do? He said. He hadn't meant to say it exactly that way. It was not the kind of question a commander asks. But it came out anyway because she had just spent 3 hours crawling through the dark in enemy territory to bring him the precise intelligence he needed, and she had come back and laid it in front of him with the same flat clarity she brought to everything, and the weight of the situation had temporarily overridden the professional distance. She looked at him. Something passed through her eyes, not surprise at the question, something more like recognition. We use what we have, she said, which is more than they expect. What do they expect, he said. They've been watching this base for weeks, she said. They expect a perimeter defense. They expect you to go to ground and wait for air support that isn't coming. They expect to apply pressure at multiple points simultaneously, spread your response thin, and push through the weakest sector before you can consolidate. She set the canteen down. What they do not expect is a single operator who can reach their command element before the assault even begins. Brooks looked at her. You're talking about hitting the convoy before they move. I'm talking about removing their command and coordination capacity before the assault begins, she said. Without command coordination, 90 personnel with good equipment are still 90 personnel who don't know what each other is doing. Effective, but manageable. With command coordination, there's something else. The range, he said. The convoy is 2.8 kilometers out. She looked at him with those gray eyes that didn't shift. I know, she said. He understood then. 2,800 meters. Against the backdrop of what the NATO file had listed as her longest confirmed engagement. The shot she had made yesterday at 2,100 was by her own description, not her longest. And she was talking about hitting command vehicles and coordination personnel at a range that was beyond what any standard military doctrine would classify as a realistic engagement. That's not possible, he said. And then because he was looking at her and remembering the 100-meter shot and the way she had talked about thermal refraction as if it were simply a variable to account for, is it? The limiting factor is not the distance, she said. It's the wind pattern in the corridor between here and the staging area. Between 1,800 and 2,200 meters, there's a channel effect from the ridgeline geometry that creates variable crosswind. Unpredictable. In daylight, I can read it from flag movement, dust lift, vegetation motion. At the time I'd need to take the shot pre-dawn, those visual references are gone. So it's not possible, he said. I need a weather readout, she said. Carver's signals equipment. If I can get wind speed and direction data at multiple points along the corridor, I can build a predictive model for the channel effect and account for it. Carver has the equipment, Brooks said. Then it becomes possible, she said. He looked at her for a long time. The motor pool was quiet. The base around them was in that particular pre-dawn stillness and that feels temporary like a held breath. What's the risk to you, he said. She considered the question seriously, which he appreciated. She didn't dismiss it. The shot requires a fixed position at elevation with no cover from the staging area side. If they have observation on the ridgeline, I'm visible. One shot is concealed by the report dispersion at that range. A second shot gives them a directional fix. Third shot gives them a precise location. So you get one shot, he said. At each target, she said. First shot, command vehicle. Second shot, if I can cycle fast enough before they fix my position, the communications platform. Third shot is a risk calculation I'll make in the moment based on what's happening downrange. And then, he said, and then I move, she said. She said it simply, as if moving fast and silently at over 2,800 meters from an enemy force who had just been fired upon and were trying to identify her position was a straightforward operational variable, which he was beginning to understand for her it was. Get some sleep, she said. She stood up from the bumper, picked up the rifle. Brief Carver on what I need from the weather equipment. I'll go over the corridor data with him at first light. She started walking, then she stopped. She turned back. Commander, she said, the men are going to hear about the convoy timeline. They're going to be scared. Let them be scared. Don't manage it. Scared men who know the truth fight harder than comfortable men who've been told a partial story. He looked at her. That's not standard doctrine, he said. No, she said. It's just true. She walked away through the dark toward the watchtower, and he watched her go and thought about what Morrow had said earlier. The thing that happens when men who thought they knew what capability looked like realized they were wrong. He understood it now. It wasn't one thing, it was the accumulation of small moments, the way she had picked up the rifle from the dirt, the shot at 200 meters, the handwritten assessment, the solo reconnaissance in the dark, the way she talked about wind refraction and thermal layers and sensor detection thresholds as if they were components of a language she had spent years becoming fluent in. Each moment by itself was striking. Together they were something that didn't have a clean name. The closest thing he could get to it was this: she was the most complete operator he had ever been in proximity to, and she was here on this base with these men, and 36 hours from now, that was going to matter more than anything else. He went back to the command tent. He did not sleep. He looked at the threat assessment pages she had written, and he thought about a woman who had been officially declared dead 2 years ago, who had rebuilt herself into something the military had no formal category for, and who had come to a remote desert base that everyone else had written off and told him quietly on the bumper of a broken vehicle in the dark that they had more than the enemy expected. He was beginning to believe her. And somewhere in that belief, under the tactical weight of it, under the pressure of the 36-hour timeline and the 90 personnel in the Wadi and the anti-aircraft convoy that was about to close the sky above this base, there was something else, something he didn't have a name for yet, The beginning of a question about who this woman actually was, not operationally, not tactically, but as a person who had died and come back and chosen to spend that second existence in places like this, doing things like this for people like the men sleeping on this base who had laughed at her 48 hours ago. He was going to find out. But first there was a convoy to deal with. And 36 hours was already 35 hours and 50 minutes. Carver spent 4 hours with her at the signals equipment before he came to find Brooks. And when he walked into the command tent, his expression was the one he reserved for things that had no easy category. "She's not using the weather data the way I expected," Carver said. He sat down without being invited to, which told Brooks something about the state of his composure. "I gave her wind readings at 7 points along the corridor. She looked at them for about 40 seconds and then started drawing a model by hand. Not a rough sketch, a mathematical model with refraction coefficients and lateral drift calculations broken down by altitude band. She told me the corridor has a channel effect," Brooks said. "It does," Carver said. "I confirmed it in the signals data. But what she's doing with that information is not something I've seen a sniper do. It's something I've seen a ballistics engineer do. She's building a firing solution from first principles, Commander. No software, no instrumentation assistance, just the data I gave her and whatever is in her head." "Can she make the shot?" Brooks said. Carver looked at him directly. "At 2,800 meters in a variable crosswind corridor against a moving command vehicle in pre-dawn conditions with a bolt-action rifle." He paused. "I don't know, I genuinely do not know. But I will tell you this. When I told her the wind variance in the channel averaged plus or minus 6 kilometers per hour, she didn't flinch. She just adjusted the model. Like 6 kilometers per hour of lateral variance at 2,800 meters was a problem she expected and had already allocated mental space for. And the timeline," Brooks said. "She wants to move to position at 0300 tomorrow," Carver said, "which gives her approximately 90 minutes to get to the ridge before first shooting light. She said the shot window opens at approximately 0430 when there's enough ambient light to read the channel effect through the scope, but before the convoy begins its pre-assault vehicle movement. Which means she has 1 day to rest and prepare," Brooks said. "She's not resting," Carver said. "She's been at the equipment for 4 hours. Before that, she did the overnight reconnaissance. Before that, she was on the tower all day running observation. I don't know when this woman sleeps." Brooks stood up. He went to find her himself. She was in the communications shack alone now. The wind data spread on the table in front of her, her own handwritten model alongside it. She was sitting very still looking at the numbers, and she did not look up when he came in. He waited. She held up one finger without looking at him, which under different circumstances might have been presumptuous. From her in this moment, it was simply accurate communication. She was in the middle of something that required unbroken attention, and she would be with him in a moment. 30 seconds later, she looked up. "You need to sleep," he said. "I need to get this right more than I need to sleep," she said. "You need to get it right and be functional enough to execute it," he said, "which requires sleep." She looked at him, a beat of silence. 4 hours, she said. "I'll be in position by 0300. 6, he said. "Back in my geo," she said. "And I want Carver available at 0200 for a final wind check before I move." He agreed because the negotiation felt like progress, which told him something about how immovable she was on the things she didn't negotiate. He left her with the model and the data and the specific focused quality of attention she brought to everything and went back to manage the 30-odd hours remaining before the assault. What he found when he returned to the men was what Morrow had described, something that didn't have a word yet. The laughter was gone. In its place was a quality of attention that Brooks recognized from other moments in his career, from the moments when a unit crosses from believing they might lose to calculating exactly what they have left and what it might do. Kowalski had quietly consolidated the ammunition stores and produced a written inventory without being asked. Morrow had reorganized the perimeter watch rotation to put the steadiest men in the highest pressure positions for the overnight. 2 of the younger Marines had spent the afternoon fortifying a secondary firing position that hadn't been touched in weeks. They were responding to the threat, yes, but they were also, Brooks understood, responding to her. To the fact that someone had arrived in a state of total dismissal and had turned out to be something none of them had encountered before. It was changing the chemistry of the base, quietly, without announcement, without drama. He found Tate at 1800 at the North Perimeter. Tate was doing what he did when he was working through something, which was to stay busy with his hands. He was reinforcing a sandbag stack that didn't strictly need reinforcing. "You went to see her?" Brooks asked. Tate didn't stop working. "Yes, sir." "And she was at the signals equipment," Tate said. "I stood in the doorway for a minute. She didn't look up. I said what I needed to say." He paused. "She said, 'I know.' That was it." "That bother you?" Brooks said. Tate considered it. "No, sir. It felt exactly right, actually." He set down a sandbag and straightened. "She's not interested in the apology the way a normal person is interested in an apology. She doesn't need it for the reason most people need it." "What reason do most people need it?" Brooks said. "To feel better about the other person," Tate said. She already knew what she was. The apology wasn't information to her. She said, "I know," because she did. She already knew I was wrong. She'd known it from the gate. He looked at the ridgeline in the distance. "That's a different kind of person, sir." "Yes," Brooks said. "It is." Tate was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "Sir, who was she before all this? Before whatever made her the way she is?" "I don't know the full answer to that," Brooks said. "But you know something," Tate said. Not challenging. Just reading the situation accurately, which was the thing about Tate that made him effective when he got out of his own way. "I know she was someone who went through something that most people don't survive," Brooks said, "and that she chose to come back from it in a particular direction." He paused. The direction of this base, these men, this situation. Tate was quiet with her that for a moment. Then he said very quietly, "Wasament." I think Brooks said she believes this matters. This specific thing, these specific men. He looked at the same ridgeline Tate was looking at. Whatever happened to her before, whatever made her officially dead in a NATO file, I think some part of her decided that if she was going to be here at all, it was going to mean something. He left Tate with that and went to run his own preparation. He did not tell the men the full timeline. He told them what they needed: increased readiness, posture, ammunition, consolidation, no unnecessary movement, no radio traffic that wasn't operationally essential. He told Morrow to brief the watch supervisors at midnight on the specific threat parameters. He told Carver to keep the signals equipment live through the night and to get her the final wind check at 0200 without fail. And then he did something he had not done in a long time in the field. He wrote a report, not to Regional Command, because Regional Command had already received his supply requests and his readiness assessments and had returned 4 responses, of which 2 were denials. He wrote a report to the classification office, whose flag had come back on her file. Brief, factual, no operational details. Just 3 sentences, operator attached under advisory designation, performing at exceptional level. Identity classification understood and respected. Request confirmation of support, authorization in event of significant engagement. He sent it through the secure channel and did not expect a response. He sent it because it felt like the right thing to do for someone who had no official record of being here, doing things that were real and consequential and dangerous, and who deserved to have someone acknowledge that even in a document that would probably be filed and ignored, she moved at 0300 exactly. Morrow confirmed Southgate clear. Brooks tracked the time with his watch, the old habit of a man who has spent years waiting for things to happen in the dark. 0300, 0315, 0330. The base was quiet. Carver was at the signals equipment running continuous wind monitoring and logging the corridor readings at 5-minute intervals. At 0358, Carver came to the command tent doorway and said, "Wind shifted. Northeast corridor is running about 4 clicks lower than the overnight average. That's actually better for her, more stable." "Does she know?" Brooks said. "She has a mirror signal arrangement with the Southgate position," Carver said. "Morrow is relaying corridor data updates through it." Brooks looked at him. "When did she set that up?" "Yesterday afternoon," Carver said, "while you were briefing the watch supervisors." He sat with that. She had been setting up the details of this operation while he was doing other things, filling in gaps he hadn't identified yet, anticipating variables he hadn't reached. This was what she did. This was what she had been doing since she walked through the gate, not waiting to be given a role, not asking for resources she needed, simply reading the situation completely, identifying what was required and doing it. At 0427, the base was fully awake. Not because anyone had sounded an alert, because men in combat situations develop a collective instinct that functions like a nervous system, and the collective nervous system of Dust Bowl FOB had registered something. Morrow was at the north perimeter. Kowalski was at the east sensor station. Tate had moved to the watchtower without being ordered to and was running the spotting scope that she had borrowed from somewhere and left behind when she went out. Brooks was in the command tent with Carver in the radio when Tate's voice came through. "Commander, movement at the staging area. Vehicle engines are starting." Brooks's chest tightened. If the vehicles were starting, the coordination phase was complete. They were moving. The 36-hour estimate had been optimistic. It was closer to 30. "Eyes on her position," Brooks said. "Negative," Tate said. "I can't see the ridgeline from this angle. She'd be on the reverse slope." "Hold position," Brooks said. "No engagement. Wait." The radio was silent. Brooks could hear Carver breathing next to him. He could hear the distant muffled sound of engines from the direction of the northeast 2.8 kilometers of desert air carrying it faintly to where they stood. Then the sound. One shot. The specific report of her rifle, which Brooks had now heard twice and had already learned to recognize the same way you learn to recognize the voice of someone you've spent significant time around. Sharp, contained, coming from the ridgeline direction, complete silence on the base. Tate's voice stripped of everything except the pure data of what his eyes were delivering. Command vehicle. Direct hit. It stopped. 4 seconds. The rifle again. "Second vehicle," Tate said. "Communications platform. It's yes, hit, it's not moving." 8 seconds. Longer this time. Brooks could feel the seconds the way you feel seconds when they are carrying weight. The rifle again. A third time. A pause. Then Tate and his voice had changed in a way that Brooks would remember for a long time. It had the quality of someone watching something happen that they will spend years trying to describe to other people and never quite succeeding. "Commander," Tate said, "the convoy it's chaos down there. I can see it through the scope. They've lost their command element. Personnel are dismounting and they don't have direction. Some vehicles are moving and some are stopped and..." He paused. "They don't know what to do." "Because they don't know where she is," Brooks said. "Because they don't know where she is," Tate confirmed. At that distance, 3 shots in pre-dawn conditions from a suppress and firing position, they can't fix the origin. They're looking in the wrong direction. Carver said quietly next to Brooks, 2,800 meters. 3 shots. 3 hits. Command vehicle communications platform. And whatever the third target was, Brooks said, he would find out later. The third shot had taken down the convoy's primary air defense targeting system, the component that coordinated the anti-aircraft platform's engagement calculations. Without the command element and without the targeting coordinator, the anti-aircraft capability was hardware, without direction. The air corridor for the first time in 10 days was functionally open, but they didn't know that yet. What they knew was the sound of 3 shots and the voice of Corporal Tate describing organized violence collapsing into disorganized confusion at 2.8 kilometers. And then Morrow's voice on the radio, "Commander, movement at the south gate. She's back." Brooks was outside the command tent and moving before Morrow finished the sentence. "She came through the south gate at a controlled pace that was not quite a run, but was significantly faster than a walk, and she was moving in the way that people move when they have been running hard and are bringing it down deliberately, because running into a base in full adrenaline state is how accidents happen. She had the rifle in her right-hand case abandoned at the firing position, and she was dirty again, the same deep ground-level dirty as the night before, and her left arm was pressed slightly against her side in a way that Brooks noticed immediately. "You're hit," he said. "Ricochet fragment," she said without stopping. "Rock, not metal. It's not significant." "Reyes," Brooks said to the medic who had appeared at his shoulder. "I'll look at it," she said. Not an argument, just an acknowledgement. She stopped walking and let Reyes approach her. She held still for the inspection, with the patience of someone who has been through this before and understands it as a process to complete rather than a crisis to react to. Reyes looked at the arm, looked up at Brooks. Laceration approximately 4 centimeters. Tissue damage but no penetration. "She's right, it's not significant." He paused. "It'll need cleaning and closure." "After the debrief," she said. "Now," Brooks said. She looked at him. He looked back. This was one of the negotiations she wasn't going to win, and something in her face acknowledged that, not with resentment, but with the slight recalibration of someone who recognizes a firm boundary and files it. Fine, she said, while we debrief. Reyes worked on her arm while she talked. She described the approach to the firing position, the sight picture, the wind in the channel, which had behaved almost exactly as the model predicted, with a 7-second anomaly at approximately 1,900 meters that she had waited out before committing to the first shot. The interval between shots, the third target, which she had identified as the targeting coordinator based on the equipment profile she had observed during the overnight reconnaissance. She delivered all of this with the arm extended for Reyes and the rifle still in her other hand, sitting on the edge of a cot in the medical station, talking through a 36-hour operation plan that had just been executed at 2,800 meters in pre-dawn conditions with the same flat precision she brought to everything. And then she stopped. In the middle of a sentence about the third shot, she just stopped and looked at the ground in front of her for a moment, and something moved through her face that was different from anything Brooks had seen in it so far. It was brief, under 2 seconds, but it was there. He recognized it. He had seen it in the faces of men after significant engagements, after moments where the outcome could have gone a different direction and didn't. It wasn't relief exactly. It was the body's honest acknowledgement that something serious had happened and that the seriousness of it had been held at arm's length during the execution and was now in the stillness of the aftermath making contact. Then it was gone. She looked up. She continued the sentence. But he had seen it, and the seeing of it changed something in how he understood her. Not her capability. He was past questioning that. Something else. The humanness of it. The fact that 2,800 meters and 3 targets and a rock fragment in the arm, in 30 hours without sleep, and the weight of 90 personnel closing on this base had all of it finally for 2 seconds shown in her face. She was not a machine. She was a person who had learned to behave with the consistency of a machine because the situation she operated in required it. And what that cost her, she paid quietly and privately and without making it anyone else's problem. The Air Corridor, Carver said, appearing in the doorway of the medical station with the look of someone carrying good news they are still processing. Regional Command is reporting the anti-aircraft signature has dropped off their sensors. They're flying a test pass at 0600. He looked at Brooks. If the corridor is clear, they can get a supply run in by 0900. Brooks looked at her. She looked back at him with the arm extended for Reyes and the rifle across her knees and the 2-second thing already gone from her face. The targeting coordinator, she said, that was the third shot. Without him, the air defense platform is inoperable. You knew that going in, Brooks said. It was the priority target, she said. Command vehicle first because it eliminates coordination. Communications platform second because it prevents them from calling in support or reorganizing. Targeting coordinator third because he's what's keeping your sky closed. She paused. In that order, in that timing, the operation has the highest probability of restoring your air access before the assault begins. Before the assault begins, Brooks said, they still have 70-plus personnel. Yes, she said, they do. And they've just lost their command structure and their air denial capacity and their coordination ability. They'll reorganize. It will take hours. During those hours, you'll get your supply run and your communication window to regional command. She looked at him steadily. Use them well. Reyes finished closing the laceration. She stood up. She held the rifle at her side and looked at Brooks, and there was something in her face that was as close to simple, direct communication as he had seen from her. I need 4 hours, she said. After that, I'll be back in position. You'll take 6, he said. She didn't argue this time, which told him more about her current state than anything she had said. She was almost to the door when Morrow stepped aside to let her pass and said without planning it, without what Brooks could tell was any deliberate intention, thank you. Just those 2 words, said directly to her face with the specific quality of a man who means something completely and is using the most economical language available. She stopped. She looked at Morrow, and for a moment, a real moment that lasted longer than 2 seconds and didn't vanish immediately, something genuine crossed her face. Not the smooth operational surface, something underneath it, something that had been there a long time and didn't get addressed very often. Don't thank me yet, she said quietly. They're still coming. She walked out, But Brooks had seen it. Morrow had seen it. The word thank you had reached something in her that 3 shots at 2,800 meters and a rock fragment in 30 hours without sleep had not touched, which told him everything he needed to know about what she was carrying and what it cost and what in the end might matter to her, more than any of the operational variables she managed with such extraordinary precision. The resupplied confirmation came at 0547. The test pass was clean. The quarter was open. Regional Command was putting a supply bird in the air within the hour, and a communication window with the task force commander was available at 0830. Brooks stood outside the command tent with the confirmation in his hand and looked at the watchtower where the platform was empty for the first time since she had arrived. Somewhere in this base, she was sleeping 4 hours before she put herself back in position to defend 30-odd men against 70-plus personnel who had just lost their command structure and were right now somewhere in the Northeast reorganizing their anger into a new plan. He thought about what Tate had asked him. Why does she do this? What does she get from being here in places like this, doing things like this? He thought he understood it better now. Not fully, but better. She was not here because she had been ordered to be here. The transfer document was real, but the decision that had put her on a transport headed for Dust Bowl FOB had been hers. Someone had made the call available, and she had made the choice. And the choice said something about what she needed from her existence that she could not get from anywhere that was safe. She needed it to matter. Whatever she had built herself into after whatever had happened to her, the only context in which it fully made sense was this the thing she had become, being exactly what a specific situation required. And this situation had required her specifically. The 2 100-meter shot on the first day, the reconnaissance in the dark, the handwritten threat assessment, the ballistics model built from first principles, 3 shots at 2,800 meters that had opened the sky and bought this base time it desperately needed. Somewhere in this base, the ghost that headquarters had sent as a joke was sleeping. And the men who had laughed at the gate were quiet in a way that had nothing to do with embarrassment and everything to do with the particular silence that falls over people when they have been in the presence of something they will spend the rest of their lives measuring other things against. The supply bird was 2 hours out. The communication window was 3 hours out. The reorganized assault was an unknown number of hours out. And the woman sleeping in this base, the woman with the lynx tattoo and the old rifle and the name that wasn't her real name, was going to be back in position before any of it arrived. Brooks went to prepare the briefing for the task force commander. He had a great deal to report, and not all of it was going to be easy to explain through official channels. But all of it was true, and the truth in this situation was exactly what the situation deserved. He wrote the first line of the briefing and stopped, looked at it, crossed out the operational designation he had started with, wrote instead from scratch the only accurate beginning he had. I need to tell you about an asset. The task force commander's name was General Warren Holt, and he had been running theater operations for 11 months without once using the word impossible in a briefing. Brooks knew this because Holt had told him so directly the first time they met 2 years earlier at a command conference in Germany. I don't use that word, Holt had said, because it stops thinking, and thinking is the only thing that keeps men alive. Brooks had respected him for it then. He respected him more now, because when he delivered the briefing at 0830 and described what had happened at 2,800 meters, in pre-dawn conditions, Holt did not use the word impossible. He was quiet for 4 seconds. Then he said, "Tell me everything." Brooks told him everything. The transfer document, the missing records, the classification flag on the posthumous file, the 2 100-meter shot on the first day, the reconnaissance, the threat assessment written by hand, the ballistics model built from Carver's weather data, 3 shots at 2,800 meters. The air quarter opened. He told it all in the flat sequential language of an operational report, and when he finished, there was another silence on the line longer this time. "The Phantom Lynx designation," Holt said finally. Brooks went still. "You know it." "I know of it," Holt said carefully. "It's above my direct access tier, but it's not a name you forget once you've encountered it in a document." He paused. "Commander, I'm going to be honest with you. The asset attached to your base is operating under a framework that I do not have full visibility into. What I can tell you is that her presence at your location was not accidental. Someone at a level above both of us made a decision about your base that they did not communicate down the chain. Why? Brooks said, because the convoy, Holt said, we've been tracking it for 3 weeks. We knew what it carried. We knew what it was going to do to the air corridor over your sector, and we did not have a conventional solution that could reach it at acceptable risk. Another pause. Someone decided there was an unconventional solution available, and apparently they were correct. Brooks absorbed this. They sent her specifically for the convoy. That's my read, Holt said. The base defense is secondary. The primary objective was the convoy's targeting system. Without it, the anti-aircraft platform is hardware. We can operate in that corridor again. That changes the entire tactical picture for the next 60 days. She didn't tell me that, Brooks said. She framed the entire operation as base defense. Because it is, Holt said. Both things are true. She protected your base, and she completed an objective someone at the top of this chain needed completed. Whether she knew that explicitly, or whether she simply read the situation and arrived at the same conclusion independently, I can't tell you. He paused. What I can tell you is that the people who sent her to you are watching this closely. And Commander, you said the assault is still coming. Their ground force is intact, Brooks said. We have 70-plus personnel reorganizing in the Northeast. The air corridor is open, but the threat is not resolved. What do you need? Holt said. Time, Brooks said. And to know that if this base goes dark, someone is coming. I'm authorizing a QRF, Holt said immediately. 45 minutes out. They go wheels up the moment you transmit a contact report. He paused. But Brooks, 45 minutes is a long time. I know, Brooks said. Is your asset still operational? Holt said. Brooks looked toward the watchtower. She had been back in position for 90 minutes. He had seen her climb the tower himself. She's in position, he said. Then you have more than most, Holt said. And then before he closed the channel quietly, take care of her, Commander. People like that are not replaceable. They are not even fully understandable, but they matter in ways that outlast the engagements they're in. Brooks held the radio handset for a moment after the channel closed. Then he set it down and went to find Morrow. The supply bird had landed at 0912, and the unloading had been completed in 22 minutes, which was a record for this base under current conditions, and reflected what resupply did to the morale of men who had been running on diminishing margins. Ammunition restocked, medical supplies restocked. The water filtration parts that had been on the denied list for 3 weeks had materialized in the cargo without being on the manifest, which told Brooks someone at the logistics level had been paying attention to his requests even when the formal responses said otherwise. Morrow was at the ammunition store supervising distribution when Brooks found him. She talked to you, Brooks said, after the resupply landed. Morrow looked at him. For about 2 minutes, she came down from the tower, checked the medical supply. Manifest took 2 items she apparently needed, went back up. What items? Brooks said. I looked at the manifest after, Morrow said. Adrenaline auto-injectors and a topical coagulant. He paused. Not for the laceration on her arm. Ray has already handled that. These were additional. She's stocking what she might need if she's hit again and can't get back to the wire. Brooks looked at the tower. The platform was visible, the dark shape of her at the rail. She's planning for a scenario where she's on her own out there, Brooks said. She's always planning for that scenario, Morrow said. I think that's the only scenario she's ever planned for. He looked at Brooks directly. Sir, I've been thinking about what you said to Tate, about her choosing to be here, about it mattering to her. And, Brooks said, I think it's more specific than that, Morrow said. I think she came here because she thought she might not get out. And she came anyway. Not because she doesn't value her life, because she values something else more. He stopped, worked through it. She's not trying to survive this. She's trying to make sure we do. Brooks was quiet with that for a moment. It landed in a particular way that the operational analysis hadn't. Brief the perimeter supervisors again at 1600, he said. Full readiness. I want every man at his station when it happens. No gaps. Yes, sir, Morrow said. Then, sir, Tate asked to be assigned to the watchtower support position. Direct ground support for her firing arc. Brooks considered it. He know what that means. I explained it, Morrow said. He knows. He asked anyway. Clear it with her first, Brooks said. If she wants support in that position, Tate can have it. If she wants it clear, it stays clear. Morrow nodded and went to climb the tower. He came back 7 minutes later. She said yes. She also gave him specific instructions, exact position, exact sight lines, specific engagement rules. She's already thought through how to use him. Brooks almost smiled. Of course she has. At 1400, the sensors picked up the first signs of organized movement from the northeast. Not the randomized anomalies of reconnaissance personnel. Structured, multi-point. The pattern that Kowalski at the sensor station immediately recognized as an assault formation beginning its approach sequence. He relayed it to Brooks in under 60 seconds. Brooks went to the radio. All positions, this is actual. Contact indicators northeast. Full readiness. Nobody fires without my call. He transmitted the contact report to Holt's operations center. 45 minutes. The QRF was wheels up. He looked at his watch, looked at the tower. He needed to talk to her. He climbed. She was already in the rifle-prone scope on the northeast corridor. Tate was 3 meters to her right in the support position she had designated M4 in hand, watching the opposite arc she had assigned him. Neither of them looked at Brooks when he came up. How long, he said. 20 minutes to the wire, she said. Maybe less. They're moving fast. They've reconfigured their approach to account for the command loss. Smaller elements, multiple vectors. Someone smart took over after I took out the command vehicle. Can you cover all the vectors from here, he said. No, she said. It was the first time she had said that word and meant it as a hard limit rather than a temporary constraint. 3 vectors I can manage. The 4th comes through the south approach. That's where you need Morrow's element. Already positioned, Brooks said. What do you need from me? She was quiet for a moment, eyed to the scope. Then she said something he did not expect. Stay off the radio while I'm working, she said. Not because it distracts me, because the traffic tells them there's command coordination, and right now they don't know what they're walking into. Let them stay uncertain as long as possible. Understood, he said. He started down the stairs. She called after him without moving from the scope. Commander, she said, the QRF is 45 minutes. Yes, he said. A lot can happen in 45 minutes, she said. I know, he said. So do I, she said. And something in her voice was not a warning. It was a statement of intent, a quiet absolute declaration that 45 minutes was something she was planning to manage. He climbed down and went to his position. The assault came at 14:37. It did not come the way textbook assaults come with a clear leading element and supporting fire in identifiable phases. It came the way an assault comes when the people running it are angry and capable and have reorganized quickly after losing their leadership in overlapping waves. Multiple approach angles, aggressive pace, noise, discipline, abandoned in favor of speed, which told Brooks that whoever had taken command after the convoy strike had decided that speed and mass were the answer to whatever had hurt them. The first shots from the tower came 40 seconds into the assault. 3 rapid, that specific, contained report he had learned to recognize, then a pause of approximately 4 seconds, then 2 more. The grouped fire pattern of someone engaging multiple targets in sequence with a bolt action, cycling the action between each shot with a speed that shouldn't have been possible and was. Kowalski's voice on the radio. Northeast element is taking fire. I count 5 down in the first 30 seconds. Morrow's voice. South approach, I have contact, engaging. The base was in full contact. The sounds of it were everywhere, the systematic crack of her rifle from above, and the closer, louder report of the M4s on the perimeter, and the incoming fire starting to reach the sandbag walls with a frequency that told Brooks the assault force was larger and closer than the sensor data had suggested. He was at the command position, radio in hand, managing the perimeter reports, when Carver appeared at his shoulder. Commander Carver said. His voice had a quality Brooks had not heard in it before. We have a problem that isn't the assault. Brooks looked at him. Tell me fast. The signal's traffic I've been monitoring, Carver said. I picked up a frequency pattern 20 minutes ago that I flagged but didn't report because I was still analyzing it. I'm done analyzing. He held out a printed intercept. Someone on this base has been transmitting position data on a frequency that matches the enemy coordination net. Brooks went cold. He kept his voice level. You're telling me we have an informant. I'm telling you someone has been transmitting our perimeter positions, our watchtower location, Our sensor array coordinates, Carver said. The transmission started 4 days ago, before she arrived. But the most recent one was 6 hours ago, and it included the watchtower platform as a primary sniper position. Brooks looked at the intercept, the frequency, the transmission intervals, the content summary Carver had decoded. They knew where she was. He looked up at the tower. She was still firing, regular, precise. The assault was ongoing, and she was managing it with the systematic focus she brought to everything. But they knew where she was, and if the assault force had received that data, if the incoming fire knew where to concentrate, the watchtower was not just an elevated firing position. It was a marked target. Source, Brooks said. Who's transmitting? I need 15 more minutes to run the signal strength analysis and triangulate, Carver said. I can narrow it to a 3-person set now. By the time the watchtower took a hit. Not small arms, something heavier. An RPG or equivalent striking the eastern support. The compromised support that Kowalski had called concerning weeks ago. The impact was audible and physical, a concussive thud that Brooks felt in his chest from 40 meters away, and the tower moved. Not collapsed. Moved. The eastern support giving way partially, the platform tilting at an angle that made the entire structure suddenly unreliable, in a way it had only previously threatened to be. Brooks was running before the debris finished falling. Tate's voice on the radio, and Tate's voice was not under control the way it had been during the 3-shot engagement days earlier. Tower is hit. Tower is hit. I'm down off the platform. I'm at the base. I don't know if she... Tate, Brooks said into the radio while running. Report. I came off the platform when it hit, Tate said. I went down the stairs fast. She was still up there. She was still in the scope when I went down. Commander, she was still shooting when the support went. He reached the base of the tower. Tate was there on his feet, a cut on his forehead bleeding down his face in the way head cuts bleed, regardless of their severity then, looking up at the platform with an expression that Brooks would not let himself name, because naming it required accepting a possibility he was not accepting yet. Ava, Brooks called up, using the name on the transfer document, the name that wasn't her name, the only name he had to call. Silence. 4 seconds. The assault was ongoing around them, the sound of it everywhere. Morrow's element firing on the south approach, the perimeter active on 3 sides, and in the middle of all of it, a silence from above that was the loudest thing Brooks had heard in years. Then her voice. I'm here. 2 words, flat, controlled, but not effortless. There was something in it, something tight. East support is gone. Platform is holding on 3. Don't come up. Are you hit? He said. A pause. Manageable, she said, which was not the same as no. He knew the difference. Come down, he said. Not yet, she said. The platform is compromised. The assault is not finished, she said. And then the rifle fired again from above, which told him that whatever manageable meant, it had not taken the function out of her. He looked at Tate. Tate was looking up at the tower with his jaw set in a way that had moved past the impulsive young Marine who had laughed at the gate and arrived somewhere more serious and more permanent. Who's in that intercept? Tate said quietly. Brooks looked at him. How much did you hear? Enough, Tate said. Someone told them where she was. Carver is working on it, Brooks said. Tate looked at him with something direct and cold, and nothing like the man who had grabbed her wrist to show the crowd. Find them, sir, whatever it takes. The rifle fired twice more from above, then twice again. Then once with a gap before it that was slightly longer than the others, and something in the rhythm of the gap told Brooks the picture upstairs was getting harder, that she was fighting something physical as well as tactical, that manageable was a term she was applying with discipline to a situation that was pushing past what that word was designed to cover. Carver's voice on the radio. Commander, I have the source. Brooks stepped away from the tower base. Tell me. Private First Class Gutierrez, Carver said. Motor pool. The transmitter is in the engine bay of the disabled vehicle. She must have been sitting next to it this entire time. Brooks stood with that for exactly 2 seconds. Gutierrez, 23 years old, had been on this base for 8 months. Had access to the motor pool, the perimeter rotation schedule, the sensor array positions, and he thought it and it hit him hard. She had been in the motor pool the night Cross came back from the reconnaissance and sat on the bumper of that disabled vehicle and delivered the full threat assessment. Gutierrez had been on overnight motor pool duty. She had heard everything. "Morrow," he said into the radio, "break off one man to the motor pool. Detain Gutierrez quietly. Now." "Sir," Morrow said, and then understanding the tone, moving. The assault was changing. The northeast element had pulled back, which meant the tower fire had cost them enough that direct approach was no longer viable. They were regrouping, shifting weight to the south where Morrow's element was thinner. The south approach was where the assault was going to push hardest. "Morrow, incoming mass on your position," Brooks said. "Call your count." "I see them," Morrow said. His voice was the voice of a man who is looking at a number that is larger than his resources and is doing the arithmetic in real time. "Commander, I need the tower. I need her on the south arc." Brooks looked up. "Can you shift south arc?" he called. A pause from above, then, "Give me 60 seconds. Not a question, a calculation time request. He waited 60 seconds. Then her rifle began again, and the angle of the report had changed the tower's remaining stability, allowing her enough of a pivot to cover the south approach corridor, where Morrow's element was now under serious pressure. Morrow's voice, "She's on them. South element is breaking. They're pulling back." 3 minutes of fire, then a change, then a gap that was too long, then silence from the tower that was different from the controlled silence between shots. "Ava," Brooks said. "Nothing. Ava." His voice had come out different that time. He heard it himself. It had come out with something in it that operational language was not designed to carry. Her voice, when it came, was slower than it had been. More deliberate. Not confused. She was not confused. But something was costing more. "I need to move," she said. "The platform is going. I can feel it." "Come down," he said. "There's a water tower at the southeast corner," she said. "Higher elevation. Better south arc. I can get there." "The assault is still active," he said. "You'd be crossing open ground." "I know," she said. "That's a fully exposed crossing," he said. "I know," she said again. And her voice in that repetition carried the whole weight of what she was. She knew. She had already calculated it. She had weighed the exposure against the need and arrived at her answer, and it was not an answer he could talk her out of because she had not arrived at it emotionally. She had arrived at it the way she arrived at everything completely. "Wait for a suppression window," he said. "Morrow, I need 30 seconds of full suppression on the southeast quadrant on my mark." "Ready," Morrow said. He looked up at the tower. "On my mark, you move. You don't stop. You don't adjust. You move." "Understood," she said. "Mark," he said. Morrow's element opened up. Full suppression, every weapon in the south position, firing into the southeast quadrant, creating a noise and fire volume that forced any enemy personnel in that zone to cover. Into that 30-second window, he heard her moving, heard the tower stairs fast and deliberate, heard her clear the base of the tower and cross the ground, and then heard nothing, which meant she was still moving and had not gone down. Morrow's element stopped firing. Silence. "Southeast water tower," she said on the radio. "I'm in position." Brooks closed his eyes for exactly 1 second, then opened them. "How bad is it?" he said. No operational framing, just the question. A pause. "I used one of the auto-injectors," she said. "I'll tell you the rest when it's done." He understood then. The adrenaline she had taken from the medical supply that morning. She was running injured and had injected adrenaline to maintain function, which meant the injury was not manageable in the sense of minor. It was manageable only in the sense that she was still managing it. The assault came again. Third wave, and this one had the character of a unit that knows it is running out of time and options and is putting everything into a final push. They came with noise this time, the kind of assault noise that is itself a weapon meant to disrupt the defender's communication and coordination. They came on 2 axes simultaneously, north perimeter and south approach, trying to split the base response. From the water tower, she started firing. From the north perimeter, the SEALs held their line. From the south, Morrow's element, thinner now, held. The base was being attacked from 2 sides by a force that was still numerically superior, and the only thing standing between that numerical superiority mattering and not mattering was 40 meters of defended perimeter and a woman on a water tower with an auto-injector's worth of borrowed time. Tate, at the base perimeter below the water tower, was firing controlled pairs into the south approach and talking on the radio simultaneously, which was something he did not have the experience to do well and was doing it anyway. Kowalski at the sensor station was calling positions on the radio with the precision of a man who had decided that the technical quality of his contribution was what he controlled, and he was going to control it completely. Morrow was everywhere, repositioning men, calling fire adjustments, moving with the specific efficiency of a leader who is past managing his fear and is operating from something deeper and more functional. And from the water tower, the rifle, regular, precise, every shot a calculation completed and committed to every shot costing something that was being paid without complaint. The QRF was 12 minutes out. Holt's Operations Center had transmitted the updated ETA 7 minutes after the contact report. 12 minutes was not nothing. 12 minutes was a long time. 12 minutes was approximately the distance between the current situation and whatever came next. Brooks was at the command position with the radio managing the perimeter reports, watching the north sector hold, watching the south sector hold by margins that made him do the arithmetic twice when Morrow's voice came through with something in it that stopped everything. Commander, South element is breaking through. I've got 12 confirmed in the wire. South position cannot hold. I need... The radio broke up, came back, broke again. Brooks looked south. He could hear it. Morrow's element in contact at close range, the distinctive sound of a firefight that has moved inside the distance where things get decided quickly and without the luxury of coordination. He started moving south, then stopped. From the water tower, the rifle changed. The pace changed. She was firing faster than he had heard her fire, cycling the bolts so rapidly that the individual reports were almost running together, and she was not at 2,800 meters. Now she was firing into the south sector at close range. And at close range, the bolt action was a different instrument, each shot not a precision calculation, but a rapid commitment, one after another, into the 12 personnel who had broken through Morrow's line. He heard it. Morrow heard it. "Tower is on them," Morrow said. His voice had changed again. The thing in it that had been at the edge was gone. Something else was there. "Tower is on them. South element is going down. Commander, I can't count them fast enough." 7 shots, 8. A pause. 3 more. Then silence from the water tower. "Morrow," Brooks said. "Report." "South sector is clear," Morrow said. He said it like a man who is still processing what his eyes are telling him. 12 personnel entered the wire. None were standing. Another pause. "QRF is 7 minutes out. North perimeter is holding. I think, Commander, I think the assault is broken." Brooks looked at the water tower. "Ava, report." Silence. 6 seconds of it. Then her voice. It was different from any version of it he had heard in 4 days. Not flat, not controlled in the way she controlled things. Just present, just there. The voice of a person at the end of something very large. "Tower is secure," she said. "I need to come down." "Can you come down on your own?" he said. A pause longer than any pause she had previously taken before answering a direct question. "No," she said. He was already moving. Brooks reached the water tower at a run with Reyes 2 steps behind him. Tate was already at the base of it, looking up, and the expression on Tate's face was the one Brooks had been refusing to allow himself since the silence had stretched past 6 seconds on the radio. Not panic, something worse than panic. The specific stillness of a person who is afraid of what they are about to find. "She's not coming down," Tate said. "She said she can't," Brooks said. He looked at the tower structure. Not compromised like the watchtower, solid. But she was at the top of it, and she had told him she could not descend on her own, and that meant whatever the auto-injector had been maintaining was no longer being maintained. He went up fast, Reyes behind him. He came through the access hatch at the top and found her seated against the tank housing with the rifle across her knees, and her right hand pressed flat against her left side below the ribs. The hand was dark. He did not look at it long because looking at it would take time he needed for other things. She looked at him when he came through the hatch. Her eyes were clear. That was the first thing he checked, and the most important thing, because clear eyes meant her brain was still receiving what it needed to receive, which meant time. "How long?" he said. "Since the second wave," she said. "I took a fragment in the left side, below the ribs. I used the coagulant. It slowed but didn't stop." Reyes was already beside her, hands moving with the quick, certain motions of a medic who has done this in the field and knows that speed and accuracy are the same thing. He cut the jacket away from the wound site without ceremony and Brooks watched his face as he examined it because Reyes's face was the most accurate instrument available. Reyes' face was serious, not catastrophic, serious. Through and through, Brooks said. No, Reyes said. Fragment is still in. It's deep, but it's not in the lung. Bleeding is venous, not arterial. She's going to need surgery, but she has time if I pack this correctly and we get her to the QRF bird the moment it lands. He looked at her directly. You've been operating with this for how long? Since the second wave, she said again. Reyes looked at Brooks. The math was in his eyes. The second wave had been 40 minutes ago. She had used an auto-injector to maintain function, shifted positions from the watchtower to the water tower, across open ground, under fire climbed a tower, and fired 30-plus shots in the third wave, and its close-range conclusion with a fragment in her side and venous bleeding she was controlling with one hand. Brooks had no language for that. He set it aside because language for it could wait. Can we move her? He said. Carefully, Reyes said. Slowly. Keep the pressure on the wound site. Don't let her use her core muscles. Tate, he called down through the hatch. Get up here. Tate came through the hatch and stopped when he saw her. His face went through three things very quickly. Then it settled on something that looked like decision. Tell me what to do, Tate said to Reyes. No other words. Clean and direct the way Tate was when he had gotten out of his own way. They brought her down in stages, Reyes, directing Tate taking her weight on the descent with a focused care that was so different from the man who had grabbed her wrist at the gate that Brooks had to consciously connect them as the same person. She bore the descent with the same quality she brought to everything Endurance applied, quietly without performance, without asking anyone to acknowledge the cost. At the base of the tower, Morrow was waiting. He had blood on his jacket, not his own, and his eyes went immediately to the wound site to Reyes's hands to her face, reading the situation the way a competent man reads a situation when the information matters to him personally. QRF is 4 minutes, Morrow said. I told them medical priority on landing. She looked at Morrow. Something passed between them that was not words and did not need to be. South sector, she said. Clear, Morrow said. All sectors clear. Assault is broken. Enemy is in full withdrawal. She received this with a small nod that was both acknowledgement and something more private than acknowledgement. The weight of what that information carried, that it was over, that the thing she had held together for 40 minutes, with a fragment in her side had held, moved through her face in a way she did not try to control. Not for long, but it was there. Gutierrez, Brooks said. He said it because she needed to know, and she needed to know now before the QRF landed and the timeline compressed. Her eyes came to him. Informant on base, he said. Motor pool. She transmitted your tower position 6 hours before the assault. That's how the RPG found the watchtower. She was quiet for a moment. Her face worked through something. Not surprise exactly, something more like recognition of a pattern she had seen before and had incorporated into her understanding of how things fail. How long, she said. Transmissions started 4 days ago, Brooks said, before you arrived. She didn't know you were coming. She was transmitting perimeter data. Your position was just the most recent addition. Who caught it? She said. Carver, Brooks said. Signal analysis. She looked in the direction of the communications shack. Then she said quietly, good man. Then is she in custody? Morrow's man has her, Brooks said. She's not going anywhere. She nodded, her jaw set in a way that was not anger. It was the particular set of a person who has processed something painful and has chosen not to give it more than it deserves. It doesn't change the outcome, she said. No, Brooks said. It doesn't. Then it's a problem for the debrief, she said. Not for now. The QRF bird landed at 15:21, 2 minutes and 40 seconds after Morrow's 4-minute estimate, which under the circumstances was exact. The crew chief came off the ramp, moving fast, and Brooks met him halfway. One surgical priority, Brooks said. Fragment wound left torso, venous bleed controlled. She needs an OR. The crew chief looked at Reyes, who was still maintaining pressure on the wound site, and then at the patient herself, and his face did the same rapid calculation that Reyes's face had done at the top of the tower. We can have her in surgery in 35 minutes, he said. Forward surgical team is on standby. Brooks turned to her. She was looking at the aircraft with the expression of someone who is deciding something that they have already essentially decided, but are taking one final moment to confirm. I'm going with you, Brooks said. She looked at him. You don't need to, she started. I know, he said. I'm going. Something shifted in her face, not gratitude exactly, something older and quieter than gratitude. Something that had been waiting a long time for a specific kind of acknowledgement that didn't make demands and didn't require explanation and simply said, "You are not alone in this." "All right," she said. Morrow stepped forward. He reached out and put his hand briefly on her shoulder, the way you touch someone when words are inadequate and you know it and you do it anyway. She did not pull back. She did not deflect it. She let it land. "We've got the base," Morrow said. "Go." Tate was standing 2 feet behind Morrow, and he did not say anything because there was nothing adequate to say, but he held her gaze for a moment, and she held his, and something was exchanged in that silence that closed a loop that had been open since the gate. They loaded her onto the bird. Brooks sat beside the crew chief's position where he could see her and the medic working on her simultaneously. The ramp came up. The aircraft lifted. She was conscious for the first 4 minutes of the flight. She lay still with Reyes's stabilization packing in place and her eyes on the ceiling of the aircraft, and Brooks sat close enough that he could hear her breathing, which was controlled and deliberate in the way that breathing becomes when a person is using it as a management tool, rather than an automatic function. Then she turned her head and looked at him. "The file," she said. "The NATO file you found." "Yes," he said. "The name at the top," she said. "Phantom Links." "Yes," he said. "That's not who I am anymore," she said. Not as a denial, not as a distancing, as a statement of something she had arrived at and knew to be true. "I don't know what I am yet, but I know it's not that." "What were you before it?" he said. She was quiet for a moment. The aircraft moved around them, the sound of the rotors filling the space that words didn't fill. "A soldier," she said. "A young one, from a country that no longer exists in the form I knew it. I had a name, a rank, people I served with." She paused. "An operation went wrong. The kind of wrong that takes everything. Everyone in my unit, the mission, my identity, the record." She looked at the ceiling again. "Someone decided the cleanest solution was to erase me entirely and build something new from what was left." "And what was left?" he said. "The skill," she said, "the capability, the parts of me that the operation had been building for years before it went wrong." She paused. "And a choice. They gave me a choice. Become what the new designation required or stop. That was the offer." "You became it," he said. "For a long time," she said. "Yes, because becoming it meant I could still do something that mattered. Still reach targets that conventional assets couldn't reach. Still protect people who needed protecting in situations where the solution had to be precise and had to be invisible." She breathed, controlled, deliberate. "But after a while you realize that the designation has consumed everything, that there's nothing left that isn't operational, that you can calculate a firing solution at 2,800 meters, but you can't remember what it felt like to want something for yourself." Brooks sat with that for a moment. "What made you come here?" he said. "Specifically, this base, these men." She was quiet for long enough that he thought she might not answer. Then she said, "I was given the choice again. The same offer, different framing. There was an asset who could resolve the convoy problem, an asset who had the skill and the history with this specific type of operation. The question was whether the asset was still willing to be used that way." She paused. "I said yes, but not for the reason they expected." "Why then?" he said. "Because I wanted to see if I could do it as a person," she said. "Not as Phantom Links, not as Ava Cross, not as a designation or a cover identity, as whatever I actually am now." She turned her head and looked at him directly. "And I wanted to see if it would be different, if doing the same thing with something human still attached to it felt different from doing it as a ghost." "Did it?" he said. She looked at him for a long moment. "Yes," she said. "It was harder, and it was worth more." Then the medic adjusted the pressure dressing, and she closed her eyes against the sensation of it and did not open them again for the rest of the flight, and Brooks sat beside her and listened to her breathe and thought about what she had said and what it meant and why it was the most honest thing anyone had said to him in years. The forward surgical team was ready when the bird landed. They moved fast and clean, and she went into the OR without drama, and Brooks stood outside it for 20 minutes until the lead surgeon came out and told him the fragment was out, the bleeding was controlled, and she was going to be fine. Not fine in a week, fine. Fine in a month, fine. But fine. He sat down. He had not realized how much of him had been held against that outcome until it released. He thought about Morrow's words from hours earlier. She's not trying to survive this. She's trying to make sure we do. Both things had happened. The base had survived, and so had she. And he understood that the second outcome mattered more to him than he had known it would when a hooded woman with a worn-down rifle case had walked through the gate 4 days ago and his men had laughed. He reached for the radio and called Morrow. "How's the base?" he said. "Standing," Morrow said. "Supply is in, perimeter is solid, regional command has a full debrief team inbound tomorrow morning." A pause. "How is she?" "Surgery is done," Brooks said. "She's going to be all right." The silence on the radio was not empty. It was full of something that Morrow did not put into words and did not need to. "Tell her," Morrow said finally. "Tell her when she wakes up. The men asked me to say something and I didn't know what the right thing was. So I'm telling you and you can decide." "What did they ask you to say?" Brooks said. Morrow was quiet for a moment. "Then that we know, that we all know what she did and we know what it cost and we're not going to pretend we don't." Brooks looked at the door to the OR. "I'll tell her," he said. She was in recovery for 6 hours. He stayed. Not because he had been ordered to not, because it was operationally relevant, but because 4 days on a base with a person who had been erased and had come back and had spent her return doing something extraordinary had produced in him a certainty that she should not wake up alone in a military medical facility with no one present who knew who she was, even partially, even imperfectly. She woke up at 21:47. She came to consciousness the way she did everything else, without drama, without disorientation, straight from wherever she had been to the present moment with her eyes clear and her breathing controlled and her first words completely rational. "What's the base status?" she said. "Holding," he said. "Full supply, perimeter intact. QRF is standing by, debrief team in the morning." She absorbed this, looked at the ceiling. "Gutierrez," she said. "In custody," he said. "Carver has the full transmission log. It's clean evidence. She'll be processed through the system." She nodded. A pause, then, "How long was I under?" 6 hours, he said. She looked at her hands. The right one still had the faint staining that field conditions leave, and that sterile facilities don't fully remove in a single cleaning. She looked at the lynx tattoo on her wrist, the small, precise lines of it, the tufted ears, the thing that Tate had held up at the gate to make a crowd laugh. "Morrow asked me to tell you something," Brooks said. She looked at him. He told her what Marco had said, all of it, exactly. He watched her face while he said it, and he did not look away. Her face did what it had done twice before in 4 days, that specific thing that happened when something reached past the operational surface and made contact with what was underneath. But this time it lasted longer. This time she did not bring it back under control quickly. She let it be there in the room between them without managing it. She looked at the ceiling for a moment. Her jaw moved. She brought her right hand up and pressed it briefly over her eyes, and when she brought it down, her face was composed again, but composed differently than before. Not the flat professional control, something more alive than that. "I didn't expect to make it out of the water tower," she said quietly. He had known this. He had known it from the auto-injector she had taken that morning, from the way she had climbed the tower despite the wound from the 30 shots she had fired in the final wave with one hand pressed against her side. He had known it and had not said it because she had not said it, and saying it first felt like something that belonged to her. "I know," he said. "I had calculated the probability," she said. "After the second wave, after I used the first auto-injector, I ran the numbers." She paused. "I decided the numbers didn't matter." "Why?" he said. She looked at him, and this time in her eyes there was something that had not been there in any of the previous 4 days. Not the operational gray that didn't shift under pressure. Something warmer and more uncertain and more genuine than that. "Because Morrow's element was going to break on the south approach," she said, "and the men on the north perimeter were going to run out of ammunition in the next rotation. And you were going to have to make a decision about whether to withdraw or hold, and either decision was going to cost people." She paused. "And I had the capacity to change that, reduce capacity, but still capacity. And when you have it and you don't use it because the numbers don't favor you personally, you have decided that your survival is worth more than what you could do with it. Her voice was steady. I haven't believed that for a long time. Brooks sat with that for a moment. Then he said, "What's your real name?" She looked at him. The question had been in the room since the tower conversation on the first night. He had held it then and held it since because the timing had never been right, and because some information belongs to the person carrying it and cannot be asked for before they are ready to give it. She was ready now. He could see it. Alina, she said, Alina Vulov. The name sat in the room. Simple, real, not a designation, not a cover, a name that had belonged to a young soldier from a country that no longer existed in the form she had known it. A name that had been buried in a NATO classification file under the category of posthumous records, a name she had not said aloud to another person in 2 years. Alina Vulov, he said, saying it back to her, not as a data point, as an acknowledgement, as confirmation that it had been heard by someone who would carry it forward. Something in her face settled. Not relief, something quieter and more permanent than relief. Something that belonged to a person who has been carrying a weight for a very long time and has just been given permission to set it down without being asked to. There's a debrief tomorrow, she said after a moment. Her voice was practical again, but not in the old way. Not the flat operational control. Something more grounded than that, more present. Yes, he said. They're going to want to reactivate the Phantom Links designation, she said. Someone at the top of the chain is going to look at what happened in the last 4 days and see a reusable asset and move to preserve it. Probably, he said. I'm not going to accept it, she said. It was not defiant. It was a statement of something she had arrived at with the same completeness she brought to every calculation. I'll debrief fully. I'll give them everything they need. But I'm done operating under a dead woman's name. What will you do instead, he said. She was quiet for a long moment, long enough that he thought this was the question she didn't have an answer to yet. Then she said, there were men on that base who didn't know what they were capable of until something showed them, she said. Tate, Kowalski, Reyes, Morrow already knew, but the others didn't. She looked at her hands again. I spent 9 years developing the skills I have. The reading of wind, the ballistics, the patience, the fear management. The way you hold your body when everything in it wants to react and you need it to be still. She paused. Those skills can be taught, not the full depth of them, but the fundamentals, enough to change what a man or a woman can do in a situation that requires it. You want to teach, he said. I want to be useful in a way that doesn't require me to be dead, she said, simply, directly. The most honest sentence he had heard her say in 4 days, and she had said several that qualified. He looked at her, at the Lynx tattoo on her wrist, at the face that had been flat and controlled and operationally precise for 4 days and was now in the recovery room of a forward surgical facility, beginning to look like the face of a person who is deciding to exist rather than simply function. I'll make some calls, he said. She looked at him. You don't have to do that. I know, he said. I want to. She held his gaze for a moment, and then for the first time in 4 days, she did something he had not seen from her once. Something small and real and completely human. She nodded, not the operational acknowledgement nod, the other kind. The kind that means I'm going to let someone do something for me. The kind that costs something for a person who has spent years ensuring they need nothing from anyone. The debrief was at 0900 the next morning. 2 officers from Theater Command and a civilian whose identification listed him as advisory without specifying advisory to what. Brooks was present. Carver was present. She was present, seated with her left side stabilized and her eyes clear, and her voice the same flat precision it had always been when she delivered operational information. She gave them everything: the approach methodology, the ballistics model, the corridor analysis, the firing positions, the target selection rationale, the intelligence from the overnight reconnaissance. She answered every question completely and without deflection. And at the end, the civilian leaned forward and said what she had predicted someone would say. The capability you've demonstrated represents a significant asset, he said. There are operational frameworks within which that asset could continue to function at high impact. We'd like to discuss reactivation of the advisory attachment on a longer-term basis. She looked at him. No, she said. The civilian blinked. I don't think you understand the scope of what we're... I understand it completely, she said. I'm not available for reactivation under the current framework. I'm available for a different role. She said it clearly, without heat, with the complete certainty of a person who has decided. Training, doctrine development, teaching fear management and precision methodology to personnel who need it. That's what I'm offering. That's the only thing I'm offering. The civilian looked at the theater officers. The theater officers looked at Brooks. Brooks looked at the civilian and said nothing. The civilian looked back at her. He was reading her the way people read a situation when they are accustomed to having leverage and have just discovered they don't. That would be a significant underutilization of your capability, he said. That would be my choice, she said. Those are different things. 3 weeks later at a training facility, 40 miles from the base that had been rebuilt and restaffed and was no longer called Dust Bowl because someone at Regional Command had decided it deserved a name that reflected what had happened there. Alina Vulov stood in front of 12 young Marines and told them something she had spent 9 years learning. She told them that fear is not the enemy, that the body's fear response is the most sophisticated early warning system ever built, and that the only difference between a person who freezes and a person who acts under extreme pressure is not the absence of fear, but the management of it. That management is a skill, that skills are learned, that learning them requires honesty about what you are actually experiencing in your body and your mind in the moment when everything in you wants to run. She told them this without notes, without performance, without the flat operational surface she had worn for years as armor. She told it from inside the experience, which is the only place from which it can be told truthfully. Morrow was there. He had requested a cross-training assignment to the facility 3 days after the debrief. No one had questioned it. Brooks had signed the paperwork himself. Tate was there too. He had asked to join the first training cohort. She had approved the request personally, which she had not done for anyone else, and nobody asked her why, and she did not explain it. At the end of the first day, one of the young Marines, a woman, came up to her and said, "Ma'am, the tattoo on your wrist. What does it mean?" Alina Vulov looked at the links on her wrist, at the small, precise lines, at the tufted ears, at the mark that had been put there so long ago by someone building a ghost, a weapon, a designation without a name. She looked up at the young Marine. "It means I survived something," she said, "and then I decided what to do with that." Brooks heard this from across the room. He had been leaning against the wall with his arms crossed, watching her teach, watching 12 young Marines lean slightly forward the way people lean when they are receiving something true, and he had been thinking about 4 days on a base that was barely holding, and a woman with a worn-down rifle case who had walked through the gate and picked her rifle up from the dirt and said nothing. He had been thinking about the thing Holt had said on the radio. People like that are not replaceable. They are not even fully understandable, but they matter in ways that outlast the engagements they're in. He understood it now. He understood it completely. Because the ghost that headquarters had sent as a joke was standing in front of 12 young Marines teaching them how to be alive under pressure, and every word she said was bought and paid for in full, and it was going to outlast the base and the convoy and the file with the posthumous flag and the name Phantom Lynx and every designation that had ever tried to reduce her to a function. Alina Vulov had been erased by war. She had come back. And this time she had chosen what she came back as. Not a ghost, not a weapon, not a designation in a redacted file. A teacher, a survivor, a woman who had carried the full weight of what war makes of a person and had decided against every operational calculation that the most precise shot she had ever taken was the one she aimed at her own future. And she had not missed. She had not missed. That was where the story could have ended, and for a while the people who knew the shape of it told it that way. A ghost who came back held a line that should not have held and walked off the field into a quieter life. A clean ending. But endings are a thing people invent for stories, and Alina Vulov had stopped believing in them somewhere around the 9th year of a life that kept refusing to end on schedule. What she believed in now was the morning after, the part nobody narrates. The part where you wake up still breathing and have to decide again what to do with that. If you've been with her since she picked that rifle up out of the dirt and said nothing, then stay. Because this is the part of her story that almost no one ever gets to live, the part that comes after you survive. Drop your city in the comments. Tell me where in the world this is reaching. And let's get into it. The training facility, 40 miles from the base that used to be called Dust Bowl, had a name now painted on a plywood sign that the first cohort had made themselves and bolted to the gate without asking permission from anyone. The base behind them had been rebuilt and renamed. This place they called simply the Range, capital T, capital R. The way you name a thing that matters more than its function. 4 months had passed since the night Alina Vulov fired 30 shots into a third wave with a fragment in her side and decided the numbers didn't matter. The wound had healed into a seam of scar tissue below her left ribs that pulled when the weather turned cold and reminded her on those mornings that she had a body and that the body had a history and that both of those things were hers to keep now. She had stopped finding that strange. It had taken most of the 4 months. The old rifle case lived in a footlocker at the end of her rack. The latches were still worn down to bare metal, the corners still scuffed from places the men who'd once laughed at it could not have imagined. She didn't carry it around anymore the way a person carries the one object that anchors them to themselves. She didn't need it to anchor her now, but she had not gotten rid of it either, and on the mornings when the old scar below her ribs pulled in the cold, she would open the footlocker and look at it for a moment before she went out to teach. Not sentiment, a check. The way she had once checked thermal, layers, and wind. This is where I came from. This is where I am now. The distance between is mine. Her eyes were still the gray that didn't shift under pressure. But people who had known her in both lives, Morrow, who had cross-trained here 3 days after the debrief, Brooks, who came through every few weeks with paperwork that did not strictly require his personal delivery, said the gray had changed. Not softened exactly. Opened. The lynx was still on the inside of her right wrist. The recruits saw it the first day. They always asked eventually what it meant. She always told them the same thing she'd told the young Marine in her very first cohort. It means I survived something, and then I decided what to do with that. It had become, without her intending it, the unofficial creed of the place said in the mess hall. Half as a joke and half as something more, and she let them. Because that was how truths got into people's sideways through repetition disguised as something light enough to carry. The fifth cohort arrived on a Tuesday. There were 14 of them, and 13 were exactly what you would expect young, fit, capable, selected for marksmanship scores and psychological resilience, and a half-dozen other metrics that the selection boards believed predicted who could be made into a precision shooter under fire. 13 of them met her gray eyes on the first morning and stood a little straighter, because the legend of what had happened at Dust Bowl had traveled, and they knew more or less who was about to teach them. The 14th was a problem. Her name was Private First Class Sella Marsh, and on paper she should not have been in the building. Her marksmanship scores were extraordinary, the kind of cold-range numbers that made instructors stop and recheck the target. At 300 meters on a calm morning, she could put a group inside a coin. At 600, she was better than recruits with twice her time in. The raw machinery of her, the eye and the hands and the breath control, was as fine as anything Alina had seen in a person who had never been shot at. And the moment anyone watched her, she fell apart. It was in her following, in the polite language that files use. Performance degradation under evaluative pressure. 2 prior schools had washed her back. One instructor had written in a margin note that was never supposed to leave the building that PFC Marsh was a perfect rifle attached to a person who flinches at her own heartbeat. She had been sent to the range as a last stop, not because anyone expected Alina to fix her, but because nobody wanted to be the one who finally cut a soldier with numbers like that, and they were quietly hoping the famous instructor would do it for them and take the weight. Alina read the file once. Then she went and watched Marsh on the qualification range on the second morning, standing 30 feet behind her where Marsh couldn't see her, and she watched the group bloom open like a flower the instant the spotter called out a score. The hands didn't shake. That was the thing most people missed. The hands were perfect. It was something underneath the hands, a hairline crack that opened only when Marsh believed she was being measured. And through that crack, everything she was capable of simply drained out before it could reach the trigger. Alina watched her miss 4 shots she should have made, and she did not see a person who couldn't shoot. She saw herself 9 years and a lifetime ago in a different country with a different name before the operation that took everything when she had been young and gifted and terrified that the gift would be taken from her if anyone ever saw how scared she was underneath it. She did not say any of this to anyone. She walked off the range and went to find Morrow. The 14th, she said, Marsh. They sent her here to wash out, Morrow said. He had been around her long enough to skip the parts of a conversation that didn't need saying. 2 schools already failed her. The board's expecting paperwork. I'm not signing it, Alina said. Morrow looked at her for a moment. Then he nodded the way he had nodded at the bottom of Watchtower 3 a long time ago. And he didn't ask her why, because he had learned that when she made a decision that fast, it was not a decision at all, but a recognition, and you didn't argue with a person who had just recognized something. The pressure came from above, before she had even started working with the girl. It came in the form of a colonel named Hadley, who flew out to the range with 2 aides and an agenda, and who represented a current of thinking that had been building in the months since Dust Bowl became a story people told. The logic of it was clean, which was what made it dangerous. The logic went, we have at this facility the most capable precision operator any of us has ever encountered, and she is spending her time teaching basic fear management to privates. That is an inefficient allocation of a strategic asset. Surely the highest use of Phantom Lynx is not to make 14 mediocre shooters slightly better. The highest use is to make more of her. Hadley did not say it that bluntly. He said it in the language of programs and pipelines and scalable capability. He sat across a folding table from Alina in the small room they used for briefings, and he laid out a proposal to restructure the range around the production of what he called high-yield individual assets to take the most gifted recruits, the Marshes, the ones with the rare raw material, and run them through an accelerated, intensive, deeply classified program designed to turn them into operators in her image. The rest, the ordinary 13 out of 14, would be cut. Resources were finite. You concentrated them on the material that could become exceptional. You'd be building a generation of operators with your methodology, Hadley said. That's a legacy most people in your position would give anything for. Alina listened to all of it with the stillness that had once made a crowd of combat-hardened men stop laughing without understanding why. When he finished, she was quiet for long enough that one of the aides shifted in his seat. You want me to find the ones who could become what I was, she said, and throw away the rest. I want you to focus your capability where it has the most impact. The most impact is not the thing that's most like me, she said without heat, the way she said everything that mattered. You're looking at the girl with the cold range numbers and seeing the future of the program. I'm looking at the 13 you want to cut and seeing 13 people who will be standing on a perimeter someday when something goes wrong, and the difference between them holding and breaking is whether someone taught them how to manage their own fear when it came. There are 1,000 of those people for every one of me. You don't win wars by building one perfect ghost. You win them by making 1,000 ordinary people slightly harder to kill and slightly less likely to freeze. That's the whole impact. Hadley looked at her the way the civilian in the debrief room had looked at her 4 months earlier, like a man who was used to having leverage and had just discovered the floor under it was not there. The board may not see it your way, he said. Then the board can run this facility without me, Alina said. Those are different problems. One of them is mine and one of them isn't. She stood up. The meeting was over because she had decided it was over, and there was nothing in the room that could undecide it. But she knew walking out into the hard desert light that she had bought herself a deadline and not a victory. Hadley would go back up the chain and the proposal would move. And the easiest way for the board to prove that the cut the weak philosophy was wrong would be for her to take the very recruit they wanted to cut Marsh, the flincher, the perfect rifle attached to a person who flinched at her own heartbeat, and turn her into someone who could perform when it actually counted. She had not asked for that fight, but it had arrived the way they always did, and she had stopped expecting them to ask permission a long time ago. She worked with Marsh alone before the rest of the cohort woke in the gray hour, when the desert was still cold and the light came in low and clean across the range. She did not start with the rifle. That was the first thing that confused the girl. They sat on the firing line in the cold with the weapons cased, and Alina asked her to describe precisely with the specificity of a range report what happened in her body the moment a spotter called a score. Marsh didn't know how. Nobody had ever asked her. She had spent 2 years being told to relax and not think about it, and just shoot like you do on the cold range advice. That was worse than useless because it treated the fear as a flaw to be eliminated instead of a signal to be read. It's not a flaw, Alina told her in the cold and the gray light. The thing that happens in your body when you're being watched, that's the most sophisticated early warning system that has ever existed. It's millions of years old. It is trying to keep you alive. The problem isn't that you have it. Everyone has it. The problem is that no one ever taught you what it's saying, so it sounds like noise. And noise in the middle of a shot will open your group every single time. She taught her the way she had taught the first cohort, but slower and deeper, because this one mattered to her in a way she did not examine too closely. She taught her to locate the fear physically. Where is it exactly? Is it in your chest, your hands, the back of your neck? Name it like a range to a target. She taught her that you cannot fight a feeling, but you can observe one, and that the act of observing it precisely changes your relationship to it from victim to instrument. She taught her that the body's fear response and the body's readiness response are nearly identical chemically, and that the only thing separating a person who freezes from a person who acts is the story they tell themselves about what the feeling means. The flinch isn't your hands, Alina said one morning 3 weeks in when Marsh had put a tight group down under a called score for the first time in her life and then promptly fallen apart on the next string and didn't understand why. The flinch is the half second before the shot when part of you is somewhere else. You're not in the rifle, you're in the spotter's mouth, waiting to hear the number living in a future that hasn't happened. The shot belongs to right now. You have to be in right now completely with nothing left over for the score. The score is the spotter's job. The shot is yours. Marsh looked at her in the cold gray light and asked the question that Alina had been waiting for her to ask. How do you do that, be in right now completely, when everything in you wants to be in the future where you already failed? And Alina Vulov, who had spent 9 years building a stillness that could absorb the laughter of an entire base without a flicker, who had calculated thermal refraction at 2,000 meters without instrumentation, who had fired 30 shots with a fragment in her side, looked at this terrified, gifted girl and told her the truth. You practice it until the practice is louder than the fear, she said. There's no shortcut. The fear doesn't go away. I still have it. Every shot I've ever taken that mattered, I had it. What changes is that you build something next to it, a routine, a breath, a sequence you trust, and you make that thing so familiar that when the fear comes, your body has somewhere else to go. You don't beat the fear, you give yourself a better place to stand. She pulled back her sleeve, the way she had pulled it back at the gate 4 months ago, when a corporal held her wrist up to make a crowd laugh. She showed Marsh the links. You know what they say this means, she said. I survived something and decided what to do with it. That's true, but here's the part I don't tell the others. She looked at the small, precise lines, the tufted ears. A lynx doesn't hunt by being the strongest thing in the forest. It hunts by being the stillest, by waiting longer than anything else can wait, by being completely perfectly present in the moment before it moves with nothing in it that's anywhere else. She let the sleeve fall. That's not a thing you're born with, Marsh. That's a thing you build. I built it. You can build it. And the fact that it scares you means you're paying attention, which is the only place building starts. Marsh didn't say anything, but the next morning she was on the firing line 40 minutes early in the cold and the gray light before Alina even arrived. That was the morning Alina knew. The call came 11 days before the cohort was scheduled to graduate, and it came the way the worst calls always came routine until it wasn't. A reconnaissance element operating out of the rebuilt base, Brooks's base, the one that wasn't called Dust Bowl anymore, had gotten itself pinned in broken country at the edge of the operational sector. 6 men, a vehicle down with a thrown axle in a developing situation, a hostile element, remnants of the same network that had organized the convoy 4 months ago, had located them and was moving to fix them in place on high ground that the recon element couldn't break contact from before nightfall. The quick reaction force was 90 minutes out by ground because the air corridor was once again contested. 90 minutes was too long. The hostile element would close the distance and overrun the position in 40. There was exactly one asset within range that could change that math. Brooks called Alina directly because, of course he did, and he laid it out fast and flat, the way you do when the seconds count, the situation, the timeline, the terrain, the range. The recon element was holed up in a cluster of old structure ruins. The hostile high ground was at 2,200 meters, give or take across a shallow valley with a thermal layer that would build as the afternoon heated. It was a shot she had made before. It was in the language of the old file, closer than her longest. There was a tower of rock at the eastern edge of the range's own land that gave a clear corridor across that valley if you could get a stable position on top of it. I need phantom links, Brooks said, and then caught himself, because 4 months ago in a helicopter, she had told him that wasn't who she was anymore. I need you. I need the shot. I can't make it, and neither can anyone else in 200 miles. Alina was already moving toward the footlocker, the old rifle case, the worn latches, the thing she had not carried in 4 months. And then she stopped, because she had built something in the last 4 months, and the test of a thing you build is not whether it works when you're holding it. The test is whether it works when you're not. How long do they have? She said. 40 minutes, maybe less. And the QRF? 90. She looked at the footlocker. She looked out the window of her quarters at the range where the 5th cohort was running a stress drill in the heat, and where one of them she could see her even at this distance. The particular economy of motion she'd spent 4 months teaching into the girl was Sella Marsh. I'll get to the tower, Alina said, but I'm bringing my spotter. There was a pause on the line. Your spotter? Brooks said. My best student, she said. She has the eye, she has the hands, and she needs to be there. She was already pulling the case out of the locker. Tell your element to hold. Help is it coming. She did not tell Brooks the rest of it because the rest of it was hers and not his, and because she had not fully said it to herself yet. She only knew that she had spent 4 months teaching a terrified, gifted girl that the fear doesn't go away, and that you build a better place to stand, and that the universe, which had a cruel sense of timing, she had stopped resenting, had just offered her the one thing she could never have manufactured in a classroom, a real one. A shot where the score was a man's life. The exact pressure that had blown Marsh's groups open on a cold range 11 days from graduation. You cannot teach the last thing in a classroom. You can only walk a person to the edge of it and trust what you built. They got to the top of the rock tower in 19 minutes, Marsh carrying the spotting scope and the data Alina carrying the rifle, and the scar that pulled in the cold and pulled now under the load. The thermal layer was building in the valley exactly as she'd known it would. 2,200 meters across the hostile element was moving on the recon position in a slow, methodical advance, using the broken ground for cover, closing the distance with the patience of people who believed they had won and were only finishing the arithmetic. Alina got prone. She built her position the way she had built 1,000 positions. Weight-distributed body, still breath, dropping into the slow, controlled rhythm that was not the absence of fear, but a place to stand next to it. She put her eye to the scope. She found the lead element of the advance. She read the wind off the heat shimmer at the 1,200-meter mark, the thing instruments helped with, but couldn't replace the thing that took years. And then she did the hardest thing she had done since the night she decided the numbers didn't matter. She took her eye off the scope and held the rifle out to Sella Marsh. What are you doing? Marsh said. Her voice had the crack in it, the hairline fracture that opened under pressure, the thing 2 schools had washed her back for. Ma'am, what are you doing? There's a man down there in those ruins with a family somewhere who is going to die in 30 minutes if this shot doesn't happen, Alina said in the flat, clear voice that did not shift under pressure. I can make it. You know I can make it. But I'm not going to. Because in 11 days you graduate, and then someday you're going to be the only person on a tower with a shot that matters. And there is not going to be a famous instructor lying next to you to take it for you. There's only going to be you and the fear and the place I taught you to stand. You can build that place now in front of me where I can catch you if you fall, or later alone with no net. Those were always the only 2 options. Take the rifle, Marsh. For 1 second, 1 full second, an eternity, at 2,200 meters with a man's life draining towards zero, Marsh looked at her with everything she was afraid of written on her face. And then she took the rifle. She got prone. Her hands were not shaking. The hands had never been the problem. She built her position. Alina lay beside her on the scope now, the spotter reading the wind, calling the data in the low, even voice of a person who has done this 10,000 times and is loaning that certainty to someone who has done it 0. Winds quartering left 3 to 4 at the midpoint building, Alina said. Holds on the data card. Thermals lifting your impact favor low. Lead element, the one who just stopped behind the rock spur. A pause. You're not in the future, Marsh. You're not in the score. You're in the rifle. There's nothing in you that's anywhere else. Find your breath. Find the place I taught you. It's right there. It's always been right there. She heard Marsh's breathing drop. She heard it slow and catch and slow again, and then she heard it find the rhythm. The controlled, deliberate rhythm of a person using their breath as an instrument instead of an automatic function, and she knew in the way she knew thermal layers and wind that the crack had closed, not vanished. Closed. The girl had found the place to stand. There it is, Alina said quietly. That's it. The shot is yours. Take it when it's true. The valley was silent. The thermal shimmer rose. 2,200 meters of desert air sat between a terrified, gifted girl who had been written off by 2 schools and a man in a ruin who did not know his life was being decided. Marsh broke the trigger clean. The report was sharp and contained the sound a properly loaded cartridge makes through a properly maintained barrel when the trigger is broken correctly. Alina watched through the spotting scope as 2,200 meters away, across a building thermal layer, the lead element of the advance dropped, and the advance stopped, and the patience of people who believed they had won broke apart into the scramble of people who had just discovered they were wrong about who had the high ground. Hit, Alina said. Her voice did something it almost never did. It moved. Confirmed hit, Marsh. You did that. That was you. The hostile element, having lost its lead and discovered that the position they thought they controlled was overwatched by something they couldn't locate or range, did what such elements always did when the calculation flipped. They displaced. They pulled back off the high ground. They withdrew into the broken country, and the recon element in the ruins who had been 40 minutes from being overrun was suddenly not. And the QRF that was 90 minutes out arrived to a situation that had already been resolved by 2 people on a rock tower at the edge of a training range. Marsh lay there with the rifle and did not move for a long moment. Then she started to shake. Not during, after. The way it's supposed to come after, when the shot belongs to the past and the body is finally allowed to feel what it set aside. Alina put a hand on her shoulder, the way Morrow had once put a hand on Alina's shoulder when words were inadequate and you did it anyway. And she let the girl shake, and she did not tell her to stop because the shaking was not weakness. The shaking was a nervous system that had been pushed to the edge of itself and held, and was now allowed to come home. I was so scared, Marsh said into the rock, her voice cracking and not caring that it cracked. I know, Alina said. You were scared and you took the shot anyway. That's not the absence of fear. That's the whole thing. That's everything. That's what they could never teach you because they thought the fear was the enemy. She squeezed the shoulder once. The fear was never the enemy, Marsh. The fear is just the price of caring whether you hit. You'll have it your whole life. And now you know you can stand next to it. You'll never not know that again. Colonel Hadley's proposal died in committee 3 weeks later, and it died for a reason that had nothing to do with Alina's arguments in the briefing room and everything to do with what happened on a rock tower at the edge of a training range. Because the story that came back up, the chain, was not Phantom Link's made an impossible shot. The story was a private first class who 2 schools had tried to wash out, made a 2,200-meter shot under live pressure, and saved 6 men 11 days before graduating because of how she'd been taught to manage her own fear. And that story did something the other story never could. It proved the thing Alina had said in the briefing room, that you don't win by building one perfect ghost. You win by making ordinary people harder to kill and less likely to freeze. The board looked at Marsh's file, at the cold range numbers in the 2 prior washouts, and the line about a perfect rifle attached to a person who flinched. And then they looked at what she had done, and they understood the way Brooks had once understood at the bottom of a watchtower that they had almost thrown away exactly the wrong thing. They did not cut the 13. They funded a second range. Sella Marsh graduated first in her cohort. She asked Alina on the last morning whether she could stay on as an instructor cadre after she gained some field time, and Alina said yes before the sentence was fully out of the girl's mouth, and then said, but you go be a soldier first. You teach better when the people in front of you can smell that you've been where they're going. Marsh laughed, a real one, and said that sounded like something off a plywood sign. And Alina said that most true things did. Brooks came out to the graduation. He stood at the back with his arms crossed, the way he had once stood at the back of her first cohort, watching her teach, and afterward he found her at the footlocker at the end of her rack, where she had just set the old rifle case back inside and closed the lid. You could have made that shot in your sleep, he said. You gave it to a terrified private 11 days before she graduated. Yes, Alina said. Why? She thought about it the way she thought about everything with care, in the construction. Out the window, the 5th cohort was breaking up 14 of them, scattering toward whatever came next, carrying something into the world that she had put into them. Because the most precise shot I ever took was the one I aimed at my own future, she said. I told a young Marine that once, and I meant it, but I left a part out. She looked at the closed footlocker, at the worn latches she had carried through 9 years of a life that kept refusing to end. A shot like that only matters once for one person. And I'm done being a thing that matters once. Phantom Lynx could hit a man at 2,800 meters, but Phantom Lynx could only ever be in one place at a time. What I'm building now is in 14 places this year and 28 next year, and it doesn't stop when I do. That's not underutilization. That's the only multiplication that ever meant anything. Brooks was quiet for a moment. You know, he said the men who laughed at you at that gate, they had no idea what walked through it. No, Alina said. They didn't. She almost smiled. Neither did I completely. I knew what I could do. I didn't know yet what I was for. She rested her hand briefly on the closed lid of the footlocker, the way you touch a thing you've made peace with. I know now. She walked out into the hard, clean desert light, where a young woman 2 schools had tried to throw away was standing at the gate, waiting to ask her one more question before she left to go be a soldier. And on the inside of Alina Vulov's right wrist, the lynx caught the light, small and precise, and faded just slightly with years. The mark someone had once put there to build a ghost. A weapon, a designation without a name. It didn't mean any of those things anymore. It meant I survived something, and then I decided what to do with that. And what she had decided against every operational calculation, against every voice that wanted to use her up one perfect shot at a time, was to spend the rest of her life standing next to the frightened and the counted out and the gifted ones who flinched at their own heartbeat, and teaching them one at a time, and then by the hundreds, the only thing she had ever truly owned, how to find the place to stand. The ghost that headquarters had once sent as a joke was gone. In her place stood a teacher, a survivor, a woman who had been erased by war and had come back and chosen completely what to come back as. And behind her now stood 14 more, and behind them more after that, an unbroken line of ordinary people made slightly harder to kill and slightly less likely to freeze, every one of them carrying a piece of what she had paid for in full. She had aimed her whole life at a future that almost no one believed she'd reach, and she had not missed.